hitting the old re hitting the old record button there, and let me grab my slides. So, all right, so I've always found this, and students have told me that this is helpful. It's not in any way fully comprehensive, and I leave a lot of the certain information out with the idea that it's good to look it up on your own. When I used to teach laws, rules, and regs, I would always have the answers in front of me on my laptop, so I'd be able to say like off the top, like, oh, here's how many members of the state board there are, here's how many public members, here's how many blah blah blah. And I would know them all right there because I was cheating. I had them written down in front of me. I intentionally leave them off of my notes here so that you have to go and look them up. Because if you look them up, you're more likely to remember them. So let me find my little share button here. They changed. Oh, wait, is it under more? Where is the share button? Oh, duh, it's right in front of me. Here we go. All right, so slideshow from the beginning. So, all right, so like I said, this is a not fully in any way comprehensive. I took this test many years ago. I took it in 2002, so it's been a spell. I base a lot of this off of feedback. I've never farmed questions. If you remember questions, don't tell. I don't want to have a list of them that would be cheating. The state board would probably come after everybody's license on that. So nothing like that. But I do get feedback, and I go through sort of some of the laws and some of the ones I think that you might see, and some of the odd ones that you're never going to use in a practical sense. Rabbi Malinger was back. We were just talking about this. 90% of what you learn when you're in school, you will most likely forget in your first year of licensure, and that it is what it is. It's they make you remember this stuff, and after you get through the test, it is what it is. So, all right, so this is where you can find everything. Now, there's a link there, but they change this like every year. If you just Google New Jersey State Board of Mortuary Science, right away it'll bring up on the Google page. It'll say like laws, rules, and regulations, and or statutes, and you just click that, and it'll take you right over to it. And you'll notice there's the statutes and then the administrative code. Just a quick breakdown, just a review of the difference between the two. The statutes are put in by the legislative body. Therefore, they are much broader and much less specific. That's where you're going to find regulations like the educational requirements, the fact that you need 60 credits prior to funeral service education, things like that. Whereas the administrative code is written by the state board. And that's where you're going to find specifics. How many aneurysm hooks do you have to have in a prep room? Like, what are those specific requirements? Like somebody in the legislative body, they don't know that minutia. They don't care about that minutia. They have too much stuff to deal with already. So they don't care about that. That's stuff that the state board would care about. So when you look at these, the administrative code is going to be much longer because it is much more comprehensive. That's really where you get in the nuts and bolts, but you have to know both. Not that you have to, you have to know the gist of both at least, not that you need to memorize them. They're not going to ask you like NJSA 45-1, what is that? They're not going to ask you anything like that, but that's where you track them down. So others examples, and this again is just for reference. This is where you can track all this stuff down. Not that you need to pull all of this now. It's just that's a good thing to just sort of leave. And if you ever need to look anything up after the fact, this is where you can find all this jazz regarding advanced funeral payments, medical examiner, all the jazz with that, all the statutes regarding that, trust account. And we'll get into some of the pre-need stuff because you'll definitely see pre-need on this. Pre-need has been a big thing since the 90s. I won't get into it, but there was a huge arrest in the early 90s, and that's when they changed many of the laws as far as pre-funding funerals. Hence the reason we can't keep any of the money. Everything has to be trusted. If somebody wants to change funeral homes or cash it out, we have to give them the money back. All that jazz all came from that legislation in the early 90s. So you're definitely going to see that. So things to keep in mind, the difference between a license and a certificate of registration. Anytime you see a COR, remember that's for the business, whereas the license is for you as an individual. When you go to re-up your license, it's every 2 years, and that's for both the business and the individual, but they're done on opposing years. The certificate of registration, which is for the business, is done in even years. On odd years, that's when the licensee needs to re-up their license. The way that I remember that is everybody I know in this line of work is an oddball, right? So the odd years, that's when the individual is re-upping their license. The even years, that's when the business has to re-up its license. And death certificate and a burial permit. And we've blurred the lines a lot with this because of EDRS, which EDRS is great. I'm not knocking EDRS at all. But the whole idea behind a burial permit is, and really we should call it a disposition permit, and cremation is really becoming the predominant mode of disposition, but that's a whole different conversation. But bear in mind that the idea behind a permit is you would take a death certificate to a state official. They would look at it, say, yeah, everything is correct. You can dispose of these human remains. And that's the basic idea behind it. Now, we've blurred the lines of the EDRS where you just drop the information in and print the permit up, which makes everybody's lives so much easier. But the basic concept is you need the state's permission before you can dispose of human remains. And, for obvious reasons. They don't want somebody to, I don't know, bump off their spouse, let's say, and very quickly have them cremated. So it's sort of the idea that there's a little bit of a safeguard there before somebody is buried or cremated or put beyond our reach. Um, a burial permit versus a transit permit. I used to talk about this in a class called Field Experience, and I used to ask, like, oh, well, what does a burial permit just magically become a transit permit by clicking a button? Yes, it does. You would think there'd be more involved to it, but I'm glad there's not more involved to it. It makes our lives a little bit easier. But yeah, all you have to do to make a burial permit, a transit permit, is just click a button on the permit and to say, yeah, we are transporting this decedent via common carrier, and it becomes a transit permit just magically. All right, so a license. Why do you need a license, right? You need it for arranging and pre-arranging, signing a death
I have a
certificate. You
question.
need a, sorry, go right ahead.
Sorry, my name is Marnie. Just to introduce myself.
Oh, that's all right, Marty, go right ahead.
Stuff that you were like, because I was a little confused. So those like statutes you were showing us in the beginning, those are the things you want us to look up,
Yeah, what I was
like
saying,
the definition of, yeah, like
this
those things.
this is more for reference. Like I wouldn't look every one of these up. If you have questions about like advanced funeral payments, the trust, things like that, I would look them up. Realistically, you're going to find the vast majority of what you need in the code, which is, again, if you just go and you look these up, that's where you're going to find everything. This is if you have a question about specifics, that's when you would pull this. This is really more of a reference page more so than anything.
Do you
Uh,
think they're gonna ask like questions like that on the exact like definition of the statute?
No, no,
No.
you're never gonna see like a number on there like what is
Okay.
NJSA 26. You're not gonna see anything that specific.
Okay.
It's like I said, I honestly, if anything, I should probably remove this slide, but it's just there for reference purposes. If you're
And
going
even the
through
first page is there for reference, or are those ones we should know?
these are ones you should definitely look up. And this is if you go to the state board's website, right on their website, it says, here's where you can look up statutes and regulations, and you just click a button. It's just a click through, and it takes you to the regs. And they've made it, and I'll point out that they've made it a little bit more difficult. It used to be you would click one button, they would give you like all of the regulations all on one page. They now have it separated out, so you click to it, and there'll be like 15 links and you have to click each one to then get the information in that one. So they've made it a little bit more time consuming, but the information is all still there. This is the page I would focus on. I would focus on these. This is really just more for reference purposes. If you have a
Okay.
question, if you're like, wait a minute, what is the deal with trust? What are we allowed? That's where you would find that specific minutia. But
Okay.
realistically, for study purposes, I would stick to this.
Okay.
All
All
right, but
right.
go.
Thank you. Sorry to make you jump back. I
No,
just
not
wanted
a
to make
problem at
sure.
all. And I meant to mention earlier, I mute everybody just off the bat, just so you don't hear the background noise. But if you have questions, anybody has questions, feel free to stop me at any point. Just unmute yourself and ask away. And I'd rather you ask than sitting around wondering about something.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
That's your thing. So again, a license is required for arranging and pre-arranging. Now, given as an intern, you're also expected to do this, but you're doing it under the supervision of a licensee. And they changed the law back in 2019 to say specifically you can do this under any licensee. Prior to that, it was a little bit of a gray area. Should you just be working for your preceptor? Are you allowed to work for another funeral director? Like if another funeral director comes, let's say you work at a funeral home with multiple funeral directors. Do you have to only work under your preceptor? No, they clarified the law in 2019 and said you're allowed to do this as an intern under any licensee's supervision. So as an intern, you're expected to arrange and pre-arrange, but as an intern, you can't sign a death certificate. That's something you need to have a license in hand to do. Embalming, you need to be a licensee to embalm, but again, as an intern, you are expected to embalm to get to the 75 or to perfect your skill before you have the license in hand. At disposition, at the point of disposition, this was relaxed a couple of years ago during the pandemic. They said, all right, if you're an intern, you can take a body to the crematory. Then they pulled that back after, but that was just a crazy time in history. So it was just a bonkers, wacky time. Um, to supervise visitations, dress and casket or removal, no, you don't need a license at all for that. I was making removals when in the great state of New Jersey, they make you wait until you're 17 to get your driver's license. The second I had my driver's license, first thing I think my mom said was, "You got to go get a body." Yeah, and you don't, and that's perfectly legal. Nothing illegal about that. Dressing, casketing, working a super or supervising a visitation, you don't have to be licensed for that so long as you're not going to the point of disposition. So let's say you've got like a 7 and 9 on one night with a funeral the next day. That's 7 and 9. You don't need a license either. You can just have somebody that's good at working the door or whatever. That's perfectly fine, perfectly legal. Now, license renewal, and this is what we were talking about before, biennial, even for the funeral home and odd for the funeral directors, right? So the individuals, and I'm repeating myself, I know, but every funeral director I know is a little odd. So I always remember the odd years, that's when the individual needs to renew their license. The renewal expectations, remember you have to have 10 continuing ed credits for each licensing period. And then they drop that down, which we'll get to in a bit to the specifics on that. Because you need so many in this and so many in that, and we'll get to that in just a bit. Um, License lapse, renewal requirements. Now that's something we're going to get to in a while as well, because I made a different slide for it. Outside of 5 years or inside of 5 years, it's actually pretty easy to re-up your license if you let it lapse. Outside of 5 years, it becomes a little bit more problematic, but we'll get into that in a bit. Is that? I'm sorry, I'm hearing it sounds like somebody's mowing their lawn outside, so I'm sorry if that's coming over the microphone. Um, and so continuing ed, like I said, new for 2019, pre-need providers. And again, the pre-need providers must monitor and attend, ensure completion of the lessons. I wrote pre-need providers, really, I'm sorry, it's continuing ed providers. I'm not sure why I wrote pre-need in there. But if an individual is doing CEUs, if they're teaching them, and again, I don't know why they require you to know this. Same thing as I don't know why they require you to know what's banned in embalming fluid. It's not like you're making embalming fluid at the funeral home, but they make you know what's banned in that. So same idea. If somebody is teaching pre-need, as of 2019, they must maintain those records for 5 years. So that inactive license, it used to be that, and I kind of doubt that you'll see questions on this, but you just never know. It used to be you could have an inactive license. And this would be for folks that were like really elderly. My mother's 85. She's actually just about to be turn 86, and she's not going to re-up her license. Years ago, she would have just made it inactive, meaning that she could still be like in ads, but they would put like, it's an inactive person, but it would be done just for PR reasons. But they did away with that altogether. So you either have a license or you don't. It used to be it could be an inactive license, and they just did away with that. Now, the license lapse, like I said, used to be less than 5 years. They would say you have to complete 25, continuing ed credits, and pay the fees, all the fees from the past, 5 years, and then you would be square. Now it only requires the fees and CEUs for the current and previous licensing period. And also, New Jersey now recognizes out-of-state CEUs for relicensure. What this means is, let's say that you don't practice in New Jersey for a while. Like I used to work in PA, and let's say you start working in PA and let your New Jersey license lapse just because you're working in PA. That's whatever, great, and you don't feel like putting up in New Jersey. And then 4.5 years goes by, and you go, "Oh, I want to go back to New Jersey." Anything less than 5 years, say 4 years, 11 months, and you go, "Oh, I want to come back to New Jersey." It used to be they would make you pay, or they would make you do 25 credit hours, which that would be 2.5 licensing cycles. So it'd be, 10 in one licensing cycle, 10 in another licensing cycle, and half of a licensing cycle, which would be five. So they'd say 25. They now drop that down to just the current and the previous, meaning that instead of 25, you just need to do 20 now. But if you have been doing out-of-state CEUs during that time, let's say you're in Pennsylvania and you have to maintain, I believe Pennsylvania is six per licensing cycle. Let's say you've been maintaining those six, you can use those six towards that ultimate total of 20 that you would need in New Jersey. I know this is such minutia, and it's not something you're going to say in a practical setting, which is why I include it, because that's something that's rife for them to write questions about, just because it's such an oddity.
Professor Daly, can I ask you something?
Yeah, and you can call me Mike. You're not my student
I,
anymore. I don't care.
I can't. Yeah. So, all right, let's say somebody has been practicing in Ohio like for 10 years and they now want to get New Jersey license. What do they have to do? What's the requirement for them to just get New Jersey license without filling any gaps in internship requirements or CEUs?
Were
And
they?
just take the state board and that's it, you get your license, right? Is it 5 years or 2 years?
It's 5 years. It's
5 years,
5 years.
right?
If you're 5 years out of state, in
Mm-hmm.
another state, here's the thing. If you were in a state, here's the way that they package it. They go,
Hmm.
well, you could get a New Jersey license right away if the state's requirements for the internship
Hmm.
match the requirements in New Jersey. No other state has requirements as strict as New Jersey. Nobody has
Yeah.
that 75,
Mm-hmm.
75, and 25. Nobody comes
Mm-hmm.
anywhere close to it. It's normally
Mm-hmm.
like 25, maybe 35. Nobody comes
Mm-hmm.
anywhere close to 75. So in the pretend world of the state board, if you found a state that had the same requirements as New Jersey, you could get a New Jersey license right away. As
Exactly.
it is, Ohio, Pennsylvania, wherever, if you're practicing over there for 5 years, then you
Uh-huh.
can come over to New Jersey, sit for the jurisprudence exam, and then get the New Jersey license.
Okay. So requirement is 5 years, right? You have to have
Yeah,
practice. Okay. That's what I
yeah,
wanted to confirm. Okay. Thank you.
yeah, sure thing.
Wait, I have a question too.
Go
Another
right
one.
ahead.
So I'm a little confused on what you just explained. So you're saying, can you
Sure.
like
It
make it more
is a
basic
little
for?
bit
I'm sorry, I'm
confusing.
trying to understand. So say I get licensed in New Jersey and I want to go get licensed in New York State after. Would I have to do an apprenticeship in New York State or no?
So wait, you got licensed in New Jersey first, and then you're going to New York? Or
Hypothetically speaking, say I complete my apprenticeship, do the 75, 75, 25 in New Jersey. I get my New Jersey license. And then I would like to also get my license in New York State. So how would that work? Like
that
piggybacking off of what you just explained, would I have to do another apprenticeship in New York State, or could I just practice my license for a few years and then like you just said the requirements would be okay and then I could just take the New York jurisprudence? Is that what you're saying?
that would be up to the other state. That's the issue here. That state would make that
Oh,
decision as to
so
what
we're
you would
only
need.
specifically talking about New Jersey right now.
Yeah,
So you
yeah.
okay? So it wouldn't. We're each state has their own legislation with that. Is what you're saying?
Exactly. Yeah,
Okay.
it's all legislated at a state level. So New York would make that decision. Like, for example, like when I got licensed in PA, right? But I got
Mm-hmm.
licensed in Pennsylvania before anybody that I was in school with that were seeking Pennsylvania license. The reason was, and once you have that New Jersey license, you can apply for the Pennsylvania license. If you get the Pennsylvania license first, you have to serve a year residency following the schooling, right? So the
Mm-hmm.
faster way around that is to get licensed in New Jersey first and then go into Pennsylvania. But every state is different on that. To go from New Jersey to New York, I know there's a way to do it. I just don't know it off the top of my head. But that would be decided by the determining state, by the other state.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
for
But
example,
you
like
were only talking about New Jersey, how they would handle it. If you wanted to
exactly.
go from outside of New Jersey in to do that.
Exactly. And
Okay.
that's the only thing that you'll see on this exam. They're not worried about New York, they're worried about just New Jersey.
Mhm.
And I'll give you an example like Alaska, from what I've been told, I don't think this has changed. When I was in school, everybody was saying they were going to get licensed in Alaska because Alaska, if you're licensed in any other state and you apply for it, they'll just give you a license. So, but that's determined by the folks in Alaska. That's all
Mhm.
determined on the state that you're trying to get licensed in. So that would be outside of New Jersey, whatever state is making that determination.
Okay. And also one more thing. How many CEUs does New Jersey need per year to stay licensed? You said 20 hours or is it 20 CEUs? That's where I'm confused.
It's 10 per licensing cycle.
10.
So
So that's each year it's 10.
no, it's each license cycle, so it's 10 every 2 years. That's
And
why when I was saying with 5 years, that would be two and a half licensing cycles. So that's why they came up with the 25 figure, right? And now the 25 figure they don't even recognize anymore. They just made it 20 because they say you just need to fulfill everything from this licensing cycle and the previous licensing cycle. So if you were out for 5 years and you come back, they wouldn't make you do 25, they would just make you do 20, and they would make you pay the fees for this one and the previous one. They used to make you pay the fees for the previous one, this one, the previous one, and half of the one before that. So they dropped it down to just the current and the previous one, which I know is very small. It's a very minor change. It really is minutia, but that's the type of thing that they could absolutely write questions about. But does that make sense? You follow me on that? Because I know it is a
yeah,
little
now I
wonky.
understand. But so each like CEU credit is like 1 hour?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Professor Deal, if somebody has been out for more than 5 years, then do they have to like go back to school or do internship?
I've got a non-answer for you on that one because here's what back in 2019 they changed the code on this and they said outside of 5 years the state board will determine it on a case by case basis.
Okay, how sorry
I
they feel for you. How
don't
strong you make your case to be.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like
Okay.
if you're out for 5.5, 6 years, I don't know. It'd be up to the board. So they
Oh, okay.
yeah, they decided not to put that in writing and they said they would handle that on a case by case basis.
Oh, okay.
So yeah. So that's a
Oh,
non-answer on that one. So, like I said, lapse more than 5 years, and the state board will decide on a case by case basis. It
oh,
used to
okay.
be, and even before, it was completely undefined because they were like, "Oh, you would have to do a mini internship." Well, how long? Well, between 3 months and a year. Well, how
Hmm.
much is it? 3 months or a year? Well, we'll figure that out then. So even back then, they were sort of doing it on a case by case basis, but now they just codified it and said, "Yeah, we're just going to do it, all by the individual."
Hmm.
So you gotta love the state board. They love to
Yeah,
keep things.
like catch them on a good day and you might be, shown some mercy.
Exactly. But I'll tell you what, I've been dealing the last couple of days, I've been dealing with the Pennsylvania State Board with a different student. And man, PA is bad. Their state board, you call them up and
Really?
they don't know anything, man. They're rough over there. But so
Hmm.
as bad as New Jersey is, you can at least normally get an answer when you call them. So there's at least that for them. But all right, so things to know, right? Record keeping, the funeral home files. You have to remember the funeral home files have to be kept for 7 years, right? And I think I have another slide on this later on, but the first year, like if you have 7 years worth of files, right? And most funeral homes keep files indefinitely. I know the funeral home I work, they opened in 1967, 68, and they have files from that year. They've just never thrown them away, which most funeral homes do. A lot of funeral homes do, I should say. But
Hmm.
you're only required to keep them for 7 years. After 7 years, you can toss them if you want to. Now, I think it makes sense to hold on to them, but you have to have the most previous year accessible immediately. So the state board inspector shows up, they knock on your door, they go, "Let me see your files." You got to have the last 365 days worth right there immediately available for them. The previous 6 years, you have like 2 weeks. You have exactly 2 weeks to get them to them. So if you want to store them off, I don't know why you would want to, but if you want to store them off of your facility somewhere, put them in storage, I don't know, but if you want to, that's fine. Now, also, on this same note, you are allowed to keep files electronically. I know more and more I see funeral homes using the really great funeral home software. It's stuff's great, man. And I see it using AI now. It's drafting obits. It's doing all this great stuff. And if you want to keep all your files that way, you can. That being said, if you get something like a copy of a check or something like that, it's always good to scan it and have that digitized. Like if you're going to keep everything digital, just make sure you have everything in there. So in those funeral home files, here's where they can really get you with the questions. Things like if the funeral home, and I'm just giving you one example, there's a bunch of these, but let's say the funeral home pays the clergy, like they put it on the cash advances, right? The clergy is coming in, they're charging $200, let's say, and the funeral home puts it on the funeral bill as a cash advance. Well, you have to keep that in the funeral home file. You have to keep that record, right? It has to be, Father Patrick, Rabbi Malinger came in and did the service. I have to keep that on file for those 7 years if the funeral home compensated them, even if it's a push through, like, and it would be, you'd charge the family, you'd put it on the cash advances, Funeral homes are nice, they're normally not that nice to go paying things for you without, expecting to be paid back. Um, but if a family just calls a clergy on their own and they set it up, you don't have to keep a record of that. So if the funeral home is involved with it, like the funeral home arranges for it, the funeral home pays for it. That's really the key issue. If the funeral home issues a check to that clergy person, then they have to keep a record of who that clergy person is in the funeral home file. And that's just one example, right? Now, things like medical records, that falls under OSHA, right? And so with OSHA, that's 30 years. It's however long you are employed at that place plus 30 years. So if you work for a funeral home for 10 years and day one, they give you the Hep C vaccination, or I'm sorry, the Hep B
Okay.
vaccination.
Mhm.
Yeah, Hep C would be nice to have a vaccination for it, but it doesn't exist. But the Hep C, so they give you that day one, and you're there for 10 years. Well, they have to have record of that in total for 40 years because they have to have it for the 10 years that you're there plus 30 years following it. And I think that the basic idea behind that is if let's say somebody had some medical issue that came from working at a funeral home, they would want that record held on to for that long. That's the best rationale I can come up
Mhm.
for it at least. Training records, etc. And again, we'll get into this in a bit, into the specifics on that. But it is something that you do have to know that students have told me, grads have told me. Yeah, I've seen some questions about that. Um, itemization. Now, this falls under the FTC stuff, and the FTC stuff is fair game. If anybody needs it, if you don't have it, and before we wrap up, I'll take a look. I'm pretty sure I have it digitized somewhere on my computer. The FTC Guide to the Funeral Rule, which is made by the federal government. It's a booklet. Anybody who's in school, it's like a purple looking booklet. And we used to give it out in print, then we started giving out digital. If you don't have a copy of that, let me know. I can get you a copy of it. They send it out for free to us, and we have a digital copy we can send to you. But all of that FTC stuff is fair game. The funeral rule in New Jersey is in fact so strict. We could opt out of the FTC funeral rule, but for whatever reason, the state said, no, 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 we're going to make it more difficult. We're going to keep the FTC rule and make our law so strict that you don't even need the FTC rule, but we're keeping it anyway. So, but all that FTC stuff is fair game. Um, so with FTC itemization, remember in preparing a statement of funeral goods and services, if you have like a package deal, and I was guilty of this so many times of doing it incorrectly. Like let's say you have a package deal, you've got your gold, platinum, silver packages, whatever, right? And the gold package saves you $800, right? And it includes a night viewing and embalming, dressing, casting, cosmetology, a limo, a hearse, whatever, right? And the total cost of that is, let's say, $5,000, and that's $5,000 before you get into merchandise. That's fine, and consumers follow that very easily. It makes things very easy. But when you write up the statement of funeral goods and services, you can't just write like $5,000 for the gold package. You have to break that down and itemize it. Like, here's how much the removal was. Here's how much the hearse was. Here's how much the limo was. Here's how much that 2 hour viewing was. And then you have to discount it down. If the total discount is $800, you have to write it all out, and then you have to discount down $800 at the end. It's kind of a silly rule, I think, on the FTC's part, but it's just a matter of being fully transparent in what we're charging and why we're charging each individual line item. Like I said,
So
I was
I don't
guilty
know
of.
what.
Sorry.
Sorry, I have another question.
No, go right
So
ahead.
no matter what, like you have to itemize it, even if it's like a bundle discount or package discount.
Exactly. Now,
And like you just said, you have to write on the statement of goods and services, like you're like you're writing out the discount as well.
absolutely, absolutely,
Okay.
100%. Now, the exception to the rule is direct cremations, immediate burials, forwarding of remains, and receiving of remains. They can be packaged together and they don't have to be unbundled. If you have your direct cremation charge is, let's say, $2,000. I don't, I'm just making a number up here. That includes part of your basic service fee. That includes the removal. That includes everything else that you're doing, like transport to the crematory. Whatever you include in that is fine, but you don't have to break that down. So a direct cremation card charge, you can just write direct cremation, $2,000. Forwarding of remains is the same. Receiving of remains is the same. Immediate disposition, immediate burial is the same. So that's the exception to the rule. Anything else, if you make packages like on your own, if you just go, hey, let's package this up and we'll cut off $1,500 because we'll make it more attractive, that's fine, perfectly fine to do. You just have to itemize it when you put it onto the statement of funeral goods and services selected. Um, FTC forms for New Jersey compliance. I'm not even really going to get into that. Our forms, if you know how our forms have to be formatted, the idea that, yeah, the FTC requires the name of the funeral home, the address, the telephone number, but the New Jersey requires the manager's name, license number, etc. So it's so long as you're in compliance with New Jersey, you're in compliance with the FTC. Now, prep room expectations. I did not. There's a later slide, I believe, where I have this listed, but there's like a million things they require about the prep room. The walls have to be, floor to ceiling. You can't have like just a divider and call it a prep room, which makes sense. It has to be a room specifically set aside for embalming of dead human remains. Like it can't be, well, it's a prep room, but when we have a viewing, well, we spruce it up and we make it the ladies' restroom. No, you can't do that. It has to be just for that purpose. Yeah, which again I think makes sense. I think I think that's understandable from the side of the states, from the state's perspective. Um, Prohibitions. What can you not have in there? And there's a list of instruments that you need to have. Like you need to have at least one aneurysm hook. You need to have at least one trocar. You need to have at least one groove director. You need one drain tube. There's a whole list of things that you need at least one of. When and occasionally when and occasionally when the inspector comes in, depending on which inspector it is, sometimes they'll go through the prep room and they'll look for these little individual things. That's why I always say if the inspector shows up, drop everything you're doing and be nice because they can always find something, man. There's always something they could find. And prohibitions, like you can't have anything in the prep room that's not affiliated with embalming. You can't store, and this is weird, you can't store like your stretcher in your prep room. I've been guilty of that a million times too. One time the inspector showed up and we had a bunch of chairs. Yeah, yeah, every funeral home has extra chairs. For whatever reason, we didn't normally store them in the prep room, but for whatever reason, we had like 15 of them in the prep room. The inspector came in, I was chit-chatting with him, buying time. And I was like, sort of not like hitting the intern. I was like, hey, like, so sort of, like, hey, can you handle that? She ran in the back and there was a back door to the prep room. She just moved all the chairs out before the inspector got to the prep room. We were not supposed to have chairs in the prep room, which again, I think is an understandable position for the state board to take. So, all right. So,
Are you gonna put the link to the FTC stuff in the chat, like
yeah,
in the
that's what I was
chat?
saying. I'll take a look for it in just a bit. I should have looked for it earlier, but I believe I have a link for it. It's just going to take me a minute to find it. So at the
Okay.
end, I'll take a look for it and I'll add it there. And what I'll also do is when I put it onto YouTube, I'll put the link to both these slides and I'll put the link to the FTC book as well. But right at the end, I'll find it just because I know it'll probably take me 3 or 4 minutes to locate it.
Okay.
I think I have it. I know that I have it saved on a Google Drive. I just don't know which one, so it'll just take me a minute to locate it.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Should they? So, all right. So, the physical funeral home, what's required for each funeral home? Like the living quarters, if you have living, I grew up in a funeral home, right? Perfectly fine, perfectly legal to do. but the living quarters have to be completely distinct from the funeral home. And the reason I have these two pictures here, this is the funeral home. I thought about buying probably about 10 years ago. I kind of regret not buying it, but whatever. The thing about this particular funeral home, though, is this was the chapel over here. This was the house. They had a divider right here. And I'm pretty sure, I don't want to throw stones because I don't know this for sure, but I'm pretty sure that during viewings, they were using their front door here, letting people go sort of through their living room into where the funeral home was, which you're not allowed to do. And again, I wasn't calling the state board on anybody. It's not my place to do so. But that's not allowed. You gotta have separate and distinct living quarters. And that's why they normally say like a second floor, like I'm sorry, a distinct floor. Like if the first floor of the building is the funeral home, like the second floor and the third floor, you can live there, and that's fine. That's separate and distinct. Nobody's going to walk to the second floor and think that it's the viewing room. At least they shouldn't. But now, if it's on the same floor as the funeral home, that's fine as well. You just need something to make it distinct, like a locked door, something that bars the general public from going into your living room. You know, Requirements for the prep room. Now, this is an odd one, right? And this is another one you will most likely never see in a practical setting, but it is one of those things they can absolutely test you on. If, for whatever reason, your funeral home goes across two property lines, right? And it's not uncommon. We owned a funeral home. I used to own a funeral home in Riverside, and it was in 337 Bridgeboro, but we also owned 335 Bridgeboro, right? And it was one property, and it was all just merged together, right? And where 335 was really where our parking lot was. That's all perfectly fine, except if you have the prep room on a separate property, right? Two properties that are aligned, 337 and 335 Bridgeboro Street, right? They were the same property. If you looked at it, you would think it was the same property. But if you look at a map of the town, there was a dividing line in that property, right? If you have the prep room on the other property, and let me draw a really lousy picture here. Anybody who's had me in class knows how terrible I am at drawing, so please bear with me on this. Let me see if I can get my little stylus here. This might help. So where is a whiteboard? More. I just want a plain whiteboard. There it is. Opening whiteboard, stop screenshot. Yeah, that's fine. All right. There we go. Okay. So I don't need to add a sticky note. I don't need that. All right. So I'm hoping. Okay. Yeah, there we go. All right. So let's say that this is 335, 5, and this is 337, right? So there's a dividing line here, just not even one that you would physically see as a consumer, as the owner, right? It's just, it is what it is. Now, here's what the funeral home is. Funeral home. And let's say over here you have your prep room, right? That's all perfectly fine and legal, except, and I don't know why they went so far as to write this into the code, except if there is not a clear path of egress between the two properties, meaning there's not a clear way to to walk across these two properties, right? If it's just a straight line where, yeah, you can just walk back and forth, that's perfectly fine. Okay, great. You don't need to do anything. You're perfectly fine. You're well within the law. Everything's honky dory, right? Now, if for whatever reason you divide these two physically, meaning let's say you put a real high fence in, or I don't know, a whole bunch of trees, so you cannot easily walk from the one side to the other, right? Let's say there's a huge fence, like a big privacy fence, right? Well, now you've divided those properties and you can't walk from one to the other. If that happens, you would then need to make this property a funeral home, meaning it would have to have everything that this property has. It would have to have a chapel, and it would have to have everything that, is required of the initial funeral home. And again, you're not going to see this in any practical settings. Now, even if you had let's say you had, a privacy fence and it had a little cut through, a little walkway here, then you're still fine. You're still within the wall. Perfectly good. You just need to have that point of egress. You need to be able to walk from the one side to the other, right? Again, you're not going to see this in any practical setting, but that's something they could absolutely test you on. Does that make sense to everyone? Because this is an odd one.
Yeah, I would say it would be much cheaper to cut down the trees or remove the fence instead of having a different
I
setup,
I
right?
agree. I agree completely. I agree completely.
Yeah.
I don't know why the state went to that extreme. I really, it's a weird thing, but it is what it is, you know. So let me get back
So in
to
that diagram, it's technically two buildings, correct?
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's two buildings,
So
and
just to
and the
have
re
the two buildings, you can't have a wall dividing it, and then it's considered one funeral.
exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So, like, and the reason I have this picture here, I used to work at this funeral home, and this was over in PA. This is the Frank Vidian Funeral Home. Mr. Vidian was a saint. He was a hell of a guy, man. He was a pisser. But anyway, this building over here, see this little white cottage house? That was the prep room. And which was great because myself and the other embalmers, we would just hang out. It was like our clubhouse, man. If things were slow, we had like a deck of cards up there and we'd like play poker and stuff, you know. It was fun. It was like our little clubhouse, our hangout. But again, although it was in PA, it still meets that New Jersey. It would meet the New Jersey statute or the regulation on that.
Professor
Again,
Daly, the road that is in the middle of these two buildings, is it a public road or private access?
no, that's private access. That's just their
Right?
parking lot.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they had a huge property. I mean, they probably had parking for probably, my guess would be like 250 cars. And I rarely a week went by when Mr. Vidian did not get a call from like CVS or Rite Aid or one of these companies, Wawa. Everybody wanted to purchase that property. They were offering him millions and millions of dollars, and he was just going, "Nope, I don't want it." He liked it as it was, and good for him.
Mhm.
Beautiful
Yeah.
funeral home, though. Really was a gorgeous
Mhm.
place. And he was a hell of a good funeral director. He was a good man. Why is this not advancing for me? Oh, okay. Oh, let me try that again. My computer got a little held up there. Hold on. Let me take two on that one. And PowerPoint closed on me. I don't know why PowerPoint closed. All right, hold on one second. Okay. Nope. 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 Ah, here we are. Sorry about that, folks. Zoom. Let me back to share. Here we go. Slideshow from current slide. Sorry about that. All right, so requirements in the building. So, like I said, I put this up here. I'm not going to go through all of them. Just you can look at all of this on your own, just because there's so much. But a leak-proof trash can, an instrument cabinet, disinfecting agents, a drainage or viscera bucket, embalming table, porcelain or metal with drainage opening in the lower end, hydro aspirator with approved vacuum breaker, electric aspirator or other approved aspirator. There's no other approved aspirator. I don't know why they put that in there, but whatever. Waste sink. I don't know why they make such a big to do over this with a minimum 2-inch drain. That was a big, when I took the test, I saw at least one, if not two questions about that 2-inch drain. Um, Wash basin with hot and cold running potable water. One leak-proof container for storage dirty linens. For each licensee and trainee, protection, apparel, and/or equipment as required by all applicable standards of OSHA. One container of hardening compound. One set metal or rubber drain tubes, small, large, medium, or small. One set metal injection tubes, large, medium, or small. One aneurysm needle or aneurysm hook. One large trocar, one small trocar, one scalpel, one pair of scissors, two hemostats, two forceps, one hypodermic syringe, hypodermic needles assorted, suture needles, suture thread, an electrically powered embalming machine, and clear white or flesh-colored adhesive tape. And we'll talk about that last one in a bit because that one's bonkers. That's something they came up with a couple years back, and I'll give you the backstory on that one. It's an odd one. All instruments and appliances used in embalming shall be thoroughly cleansed and disinfected immediately after the conclusion of each individual case, meaning that if the inspector walks in and there's dried blood on everything, there's going to be an issue, and that's understandable. Um, Potable water supply. All owners and managers shall ensure the potable water supply is not open to the drain to the danger of contamination from any source. The requirement in above may be satisfied by the installation of any approved hydroaspirator or other or and such devices as may be necessary to accomplish the purpose of this rule. Any infraction of this rule shall be reported to the board, shall be reported immediately to the board. And what they're saying is what their fear is, it's kind of odd, but their fear is this. Let's say your building was connected to another building, right? You shared the same water supply. You're aspirating somebody. Something gets messed up with the plumbing, and the aspirate that you're basically pulling out of this person gets kicked into the water system through the pipes and is then in the general drinking water. That's what they're afraid of. I doubt this has ever happened. I saw an episode of Quincy where it happened once. I've never seen it in real life. And if you don't know what Quincy is, which you probably don't, it's some show that was on in the 1970s about a medical examiner. It's quite ridiculous when you watch it back now. It's actually kind of entertaining to watch back. It's sort of a cringe fest. But burial preparation performed in a separate room. No embalming or other preparation for burial or disposition of dead human bodies shall be performed in any funeral establishment except in a room set aside exclusively and approved by the board for such purpose. Like I was saying before, you can't have a prep room that you go, well, we'll make it the restroom during viewings. No, it doesn't. No, it has to be just for that purpose. All right, FTC price disclosures. After 2019, the manager may designate an employee, even unlicensed, to provide price info on the phone. My wife does this all the time. My wife is not licensed. She works at a funeral home. The funeral home only hired me to hire her. They told me this is when they hired us. She knows what she's doing, but she handles price callers all the time, and perfectly legal to do. And if the manager wanted to designate her as the person to handle all price inquiries, perfectly legal. You don't have to have a licensee to do that. Now, as a non-licensee, you cannot sit down with somebody and make arrangements. You can't sit down there and get into the nuts and bolts of it, but you can read off of the general price list if somebody calls up, because normally these conversations go along the line of how much is it for a direct cremation? Well, our charge is X. And they go, okay, thank you. That's pretty much 95% of those calls. So it's just a matter of really reading off of the GPL. Responding to questions concerning information not on the price list shall be referred to a licensee or an intern, and they specified that in 2019. So they moved the intern status up a bit, which it should be, because again, you're pretty much a licensee just without that license. You're pretty much doing everything else. You just need to get across that finish line. Okay, the multiple ownership disclosure. This has to go onto the general price list if you own more than one funeral home. A person who owns 50% or greater interest of this registered mortuary also owns 50% or greater interest in the following registered mortuaries in the state of New Jersey, along with the name of the funeral home and the municipality description, enough to identify it. Change in 2019 in that the multiple ownership disclosure only needs to be on the general price list. So if you have multiple price lists, if you have a general price list, a casket price list, outer burial container price list, only needs to be on the GPL. And this is only if you own multiple places. And if you do own more than one place, it's best to just put this on there. I was in violation of this many years ago. This is like 2007, 2008. We had two funeral homes, and we thought that we were in compliance because the way the business broke down, I owned 40%, my brother owned 40%, my mom owned 20%. So we're like, nobody owns 50% or more in the other funeral home. Well, it doesn't work like that. We owned 40% of that company, which owned 100% of that funeral home. So if you have more than one funeral home, it's best to just put that information on there. And I think their fear is, I think the reason they even put this on there is, let's say you walk into Brand X Funeral Home and they say, you say, well, the total will be $8,500. And they go, that's absurd. I wouldn't pay a dollar more than $6,950. They storm out to your competitor across the street. They don't realize that you own the competitor. You call over there and you go, hey, charge them $6,950, not a penny more. It's kind of an irrational thing. It's an irrational stance, I think, for the state board to take, but it is what it is.
I have a question, Professor Daly.
Yes,
Let's
Fatima.
say there is a licensed mortuary and they want to open a new branch to serve a neighboring community. So Like, can the manager of the current branch be the manager of the other branch as well?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah. You can be a manager of multiple locations. That's a good
Okay.
question, though. Very good question. But
Mm.
yeah, you can definitely be the manager of more than one place. Especially if let's say I used to know a guy that owned like six funeral homes. Now he was doing maybe 20 calls out of each one, and he was a nice guy. I don't want to throw stones at him, but he was a manager of all of those locations, all perfectly legal.
Okay. Alrighty.
So now mortuary use issues.
Can we circle back real quick about? I'm just kind of confused about the whole 50% thing. Like,
Sure, sure.
sorry.
No, don't apologize. Don't apologize. So what is your question about it?
Like, it's just like a person owns 50% or greater interest of this registered mortgage. Like, what does that mean? Also owns 50% or greater interest in the following. Like,
What
so you're the owner if you like own.
Professor Daly, I can't hear the other person who's asking a question. Like, can she increase the volume of her mic or something? Or I don't know.
It's at the highest it is.
Yeah, and that's what I can hear, and it is a little bit lower, but it is what it is. Don't worry. Fatima, I get you, but it is what it is. Some people's speakers are better than others, and I'm
Okay.
not
Yeah, I'm
throwing stones at
sorry.
your
It's the highest.
speaker either, Marty.
Can you hear me or no?
I can hear you. Yeah, yeah. It is
Okay.
a little bit lower, but it's fine. It's fine.
Um. Yeah, I just don't. So you're saying you have to own 51%? Like, I'm confused. Like, I'm confused by this.
If you own, and the reason that they have the wording this way, realistically, if you own more than one funeral home, you have to disclose that. The reason they have the 50% ownership is you could have somebody who maybe owns 10% of a funeral home. Let's say you went on Shark Tank, right? And you're like, I've got a great idea for funerals and I want to open 10 places and blah, blah, blah. And one of the sharks goes, great, I'll back you, and they purchase 5% of the total, funeral home business that you own. Well, they own less than 50%, so they wouldn't need to be included in any of this. What they're worried about is somebody who does own 50% or more, meaning realistically, if you own a funeral home, that's really what they're getting down to. The reason they have the 50% is just theoretically you could own less than 50% interest in a funeral home. If let's say, there's a funeral home down the street, they're struggling financially. You happen to have just won the lottery and you go, hey, look, I'll tell you what, I'll give you $1 million if I get 20% of all of your future income, or all percent of 20% of your future profits or something like that.
Right.
So you would just be buying 20% of that funeral home. So they're not as concerned about somebody who's investing like that. But if you own 50% or more, then you are sort of invested. That means that you most likely are a funeral director. So I agree with you. The wording is wonky. I really think they should just make it that if you own more than one funeral home, just make it flat out like that. But and I
So don't be like. So like, if you own 40%, like you don't have to disclose that you own 40% of it.
That's correct. That's correct.
That's what they're getting at. Okay, so like, you really have to say you're an owner if it's 50% or more.
Exactly.
Okay,
Exactly.
now I
And
understand.
yeah, and realistically, most times if somebody owns a funeral home, they tend to own the whole funeral home. And even if you have a partner in it, it's most cases like if you have a partner, you're most likely going to open an LLC, and that
Yeah.
LLC would be what actually owns the funeral home. So it's 100% of that funeral home is owned by the LLC. So even if you only own a part of if you own more than one funeral home, really you have to disclose it is what it comes down to. I highly doubt you would see a question that said if you own like 47% of a funeral home. I really doubt that you would see a question like that. But if you did see a question like that, yeah, you wouldn't have to disclose it, but I highly doubt you would see a question like
It's
that.
so weird how they like word it, because it's like it's the wording that like confused me with this, you know?
Yeah, it's the legal speak, and it's
Yeah, it's like
and when you look at the regulations, the statutes and the regs, they're all written like that. It's like such a pain, but they
yeah, it's
they
like it's almost like they write it like that so you don't know what you're reading. Like, it's like so difficult to understand.
Why do you think attorneys charge like $800 an hour?
I know, exactly. All right, thank you so much for clarifying that.
Sure thing, sure thing. And please don't apologize when you cut in. I would rather you ask than
Yeah, I just
be
feel awkward doing it because I always
no,
have a lot of questions, and I'm like, I feel like I'm a pain in the ass, you know?
ask away. I like pains in the ass. It's fine.
Okay. All
It's
right,
cool.
thanks.
Anybody's trust me. Anybody who's the other folks that have been in class, they know. Please ask away.
Okay, thanks.
Now, food in the mortuary, and
So, Professor Daly, can I also ask one thing? So, if
of
you own two funeral homes, do you have to have the identical GPL? Like, let's say one is in Livingston, New Jersey, and the other one is in Trenton. Do you
no,
have to have? No, right? Because
no.
it depends on the area and the.
Exactly. Yeah, because
Oh, okay.
if you look at the price that a funeral home would charge, let's say you're in way North Jersey, right? Like in the
Mm-hmm.
Wealth Belt, right? Things are going to be more expensive than if you're
Mm-hmm.
down in like Salem County, down in like, I
Mm-hmm.
don't know, Millville or something. And I'm not throwing stones at Millville, but things are, it's a little things are a little cheaper down there, you know? So yeah, you can set your prices to whatever you think that area that area warrants. However, the only place that this changes is if you have more than one funeral home operating out of the same location, right? And this used to be a popular thing. And I mean, I'm going back a spell. Back in like the 80s, this was popular, where you'd have like I remember my uncle, Paul Budd, God rest his soul, he was a good man, but he owned Budd Funeral Home in Woodbury, and he sold his building and moved in with Davis Funeral Home. So it was a Davis and Budd Funeral Home, both operating out of the same place. That's perfectly fine, perfectly legal. In that situation, you can have completely different GPLs. However, if there's a relationship, if you were related to the other owner, like let's say my wife and I owned a funeral home and she decided to put a shingle up. Let's say she got licensed and she decided to put a shingle up and I ran the Mike Funeral Home, she ran the Jen Funeral Home. Well, we're married. So we would have to have an identical price list at that point because the fear would be, if let's say she had a super cheap GPL, I had the super expensive GPL. We sit there, we wait for somebody to pull up, we see if they're driving a Cadillac versus a 1978 Plymouth. And we go, oh, okay, well, the Caddy will use this one. The old Plymouth will use the cheap one. That's what they're afraid of. But if there's no relationship between the two owners, they can be completely different. Then that's even out of the same location. That makes sense?
Yeah.
All right, so food in the mortuary, and this was a hot topic for a while. I'm a big fan of it. I like having food in the mortuary, and I'm not talking about serving everybody a 7-course meal. I just think it's nice to be able to offer everyone a cup of coffee and maybe a pastry or something. But yeah, this was strictly banned. I mean, up until 2019, this was across the board. Like, yeah, you could only have water. That was it. And in 2019, they said, all right, let's reevaluate this. And I said, all right, you can have food, you can serve non-alcoholic beverages, but you can't prepare the food at the funeral home. That's their one caveat, and that's understandable. They don't want you preparing food anywhere near where a body is being embalmed. That being said, I grew up in a funeral home, and all of my meals were made in the same building. That bodies were being embalmed, but hey, it is what it is. I can understand their trepidation there.
So, what about the chapel when, like, during the viewing, like, can people take food into the chapel
Yeah, yeah, there's no
during the viewing?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh,
Absolutely.
okay.
Yeah, you could be sitting there eating a steak if you want to.
Oh, really?
So
Because in the class that we took last semester, Shivan like specified that not in the chapel, you're not allowed to. Embalming room, I get it, right? The prep
well,
room, but
mm,
chapel also not. And I was reading, they say like you can have it in the chapel if there is a memorial service
well,
going on.
it used to
Yeah.
be, and the old law used to say that you could have it in so long as there was a service without a body. And actually, the way that the law was written was you cannot serve food in any service where dead human remains are involved. So every funeral director said, well, what about a memorial service? Or what about like if we have a holiday thing where, it's around the
Hmm.
Christmas time or whatever. So we have everybody in and, we have a memorial of some sort for, everybody we served this past year. Can we serve food then? And the state board never really gave a solid answer on it. They sort of left it in a gray area.
Hmm.
After this 2019 ruling, you can have food in the chapel. However, many funeral homes say you can't. Like many funeral homes go, look, we don't want you to take it in the chapel, and that's understandable. But
Okay.
no, there's nothing in the code that doesn't that says that you're
Okay.
not allowed to have it in
Mm-hmm.
the chapel. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and Siobhan might have just been thinking about policy, and it very well could be a policy, maybe at a funeral home where she works or something. But no, the law is pretty clear on that you can have and double check me on that. Go back and double check it. It's been a spell since I've taught laws, rules, and regs, so it's always a good idea to double check me on these things. But I'm pretty
Mm-hmm.
sure that you're allowed to have it pretty much anywhere. Again, not in the prep room or whatever, but
Yeah,
which is
definitely.
understandable.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Mm. That being said, I remember years ago, I remember embalmers smoking in the prep room, and they thought
Oh,
nothing of it. Again, not a good idea for
not at
so many
all.
reasons, but
Uh,
all right. So if you close a funeral home, and again, I should take off as it changes as of 2019. It's been a spell since then, but you have to show evidence to the state board that the EDRS account is closed. You must inform the state board of a location and an individual who's in charge of the funeral home records. And those funeral home records have to be kept for 7 years. Again, just as if the funeral home was still in existence. So if you're closing down your funeral home for whatever reason, you got to find like, and most funeral, like if a competitor ever called me up and said, "Hey, I'm closing shop. Would you take my files?" I'd be like, "Yeah, I'll take your files, of course. Just tell people to call me instead of you. Why not?" But you have to hand them off to somebody so that they're available, which makes sense because the basic the basic idea behind the law to begin with is somebody should be able to access these files for the next 7 years. Just because the funeral home closes doesn't mean that you can't now those files just go missing. So you have to hand them off to somebody.
you don't have to send it to state board as long as you have somebody to take custody of those, and you just inform the board that they're you're like handed over. They're handed
Exactly.
over to these people. Like you don't have to mail the copy to the state board, right? Just inform them.
No, no,
Okay.
you just tell them, hey, we're closing, and we're going to hand off our records to our competitor or whoever you're giving them to.
Okay.
Maybe you hate your competitor and you want to give it to somebody 2 towns over. That's fine too. I
Yeah.
know a lot of funeral directors do not like each other, and I can understand that. So hey, if you want to do that, that's fine too. But
And you
I'm
it
want to
so
hand over
sorry.
your baggage, right? Whoever accepts
yeah,
your baggage.
exactly,
I have a
exactly.
quick question, and I also have a 2-year-old, so I'm sorry. She's
That's all
chirping in the
right.
back.
That's all
Um,
right.
and it is okay for these records to be electronic, is what you're saying.
Yes, yes.
So if you're providing physical or electronic, that's a-okay.
Exactly. Yes. That's a good,
Okay.
that's a very good point. That's a good question. Yeah. If you've kept everything electronically, perfectly legal to do. You just got to hand those electronic files off to somebody else. Or let's say everything's on a website. You call them up, you say, all right, I'm going to put you onto this website now. What password? Or here's my password to it, or however you handle that. But yeah, that's
Okay.
perfectly fine.
Yeah, I come from Pennsylvania, and you're not allowed to do electronic, so I just wanted to clarify. Thank you.
I got you. Good question. Good question. All right, intern regulations, the preceptor qualifications. You have to be licensed at least 2 years. How many interns can a funeral home have? And I really disagree with this legislation. This is regulation. This is a reg rather than a statute, I believe. But the reg says that any funeral home can have up to 2 interns. You can't have more than 2 interns, which is silly if you ask me, because there are funeral homes that are doing like 1,000 calls a year. Why should they be only limited to two? But it is what it is. No, the each funeral home, the if a funeral home takes an intern, the minimum amount of calls that they can do, they have to do at least 25 funerals a year. And that's not including stillborns. Here's the rationale behind that. Your internship can be up to 3 years long. And if you're working at a funeral home and the funeral home is only doing 25 calls a year, they're doing consistently every year 25 calls. If you did everything on those calls, meaning you did the embalming, you worked the service, over the course of those 3 years, you would get your 75 embalmings excuse me, and 75 funerals. And that's what the regulation used to be. The requirement used to just be 75 funerals and 75 embalmings. That 25 sets of funeral arrangements, that wasn't added until like 2008, 2009, something like that, which I like. I agree with that. But that's why the minimum is set the way that it is. You know, if you were doing just 25 calls a year, if you had an intern and they did everything on all those 25 calls, over the 3 years, they'd get their 75 funerals and 75 embalmings. And that's also assuming everybody's being embalmed, which when they wrote the regulation, pretty much everybody was, but times have changed. So the internship specifics. And remember, by default, your internship is 2 years. If you have more than 90 credits prior to funeral service education, they will drop that minimum down to 1 year. You can take up to 3 years. They'll give you a third year on that without question. It's statutorily, they have to give you a third year if you request it. And remember, during that time, you have to do the 75 embalmings, 75 funerals, 25 sets of funeral arrangements. Now, internship extensions. They're given quite frequently. You just need to request it at least, I believe, double check me on this. I believe you have to request it 3 months prior to your internship expiring. It might be 6 months though. This is one of those things that I leave off of my notes on purpose. So it might be 3 months, it might be 6 months. So double check that. Now, if you failed the state board practical, which again, I'm sort of I'm sort of tearing down the fourth wall as it is. I cannot tell you. I've never heard of anybody failing the practical. I'm not saying to mail it in, but the practical, if you've done the 75 embalmings leading up to it, you should be okay on it. I tell you what, when I took the practical, I was as nervous. Man, I was nervous. And the gentleman who did it, he watched me for maybe 10 minutes and he was chit-chatting with my preceptor and then just left the paperwork and headed out. When my mom did hers, and given this is back in the 80s, when my mom did hers, the guy actually had her raise the radial. So you never know what you're going to get. But most people, I've not heard of a lot of people failing it. But if you do fail it, you have to wait 30 days before you can do it again, and you have to pay to do it again. I think the charge is $125. You'd have to pay that $125 again. Now, concurrent internship. This is another weird one where, okay, like somebody chimed in and said they were in Pennsylvania, right? In PA, they do not have a concurrent internship. You have to do the resident internship after you complete mortuary school, right? Now in New Jersey, you go, oh, we're doing concurrently, right? You're in mortuary school while you're doing your internship. That's not what they're talking about. That's what makes it so confusing when they are talking about a concurrent internship. What they're talking about is if you are doing the initial 60 credits required prior to funeral service education, that is the period of the concurrent internship. Once you start taking the funeral service classes, it's no longer considered a concurrent internship, although you're doing your education concurrently with the internship, which is weird, but that's what they're talking about with a concurrent internship. They're talking about the initial 60 credits. That makes sense to everyone because it's a bonkers
I
one.
did not understand that.
Okay.
Sorry.
Let me try something else here.
You mean 60 credits in mortuary school?
No, prior to mortuary school. So okay, so no, oh, here it is. So let's see, here we go. Let me just erase all this. So all right, so New Jersey requires 60 credits, right? They require 60 credits. I know that looks like go credit. I'm not very good at drawing. 60 credits prior to funeral service education, right? Now, if you get, let's say, let's say you get done high school, right? You're like 18 years old. You're like, oh, you grew up in a funeral home. You're like, I want to be a funeral director. Or even if you didn't grow up in a funeral home, you're like, I want to be a funeral director. Great, wonderful. You have to do those initial 60 credits prior to funeral service education. The state of New Jersey really doesn't care what those 60 credits, what makes up those 60 credits. I always say you could have 60 credits in basket weaving, it would satisfy the statute. I don't think it's a good idea to get 60 credits in basket weaving, but it is what it is. But this would be the concurrent period. Now, when you do the funeral service classes, right? The ABFSE curriculum, right? Right. That's normally, I'm going to say it's like 39 credits, something like that, right? Now, this is not concurrent. This period here, although when you're doing those funeral service classes, you're in class and you are doing the internship, but it's not considered a concurrent internship. If you are getting the initial 60 credits needed before you take any funeral service classes and you're doing your internship at that time, you're getting the 75. Oh, geez, I messed that up. You're in the 75, 75, and 25. During this period, you can get the full 75, 75, and 25 when you're doing those initial 60 credits, right? And if so, that would be the period where they're considering it concurrent. When you're doing the funeral service classes, it's no longer considered concurrent, which is odd, but that's their terminology. Does that make sense? It's so wonky, I get, but are you following me on that?
I mean, it makes sense now, but I just think conceptually it's kind of dumb.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think it's really silly, and I think I wish they would revisit the way that they do these laws, but it's what we're stuck with.
So if you like graduate, say you go to McAllister, right, and you
Mm.
graduate and you never went to college before, then you have to get another 60 credits.
Well, if you went to McAllister and I had a student once, I'm going back years, and she did the program, and I'm not throwing stones at all. I know the folks up in McAllister, they're nice folks. They take what they do very seriously. I think it's a little more expensive, but hey, I'm not throwing stones at them. But I had a student go through their program, and they did an associate degree there. So that's what's required in New York. So in that associate degree, they had about 30 credits of general education. I'm just going to make it easy, 30 credits, and we'll say 30 credits of funeral service. So they got done. They went to get licensed, and the state said, you can't get licensed. You don't have 60 credits. You need the 60 credits in addition to the funeral service classes. So then the student came to us and did the 30 credits. And I mean, they were just taking just nonsense, just whatever, just to hit that 60 credit
Yeah.
mark, which is fine. Again, like I said, you could do 60 credits in basket weaving and it would satisfy the statute. It wouldn't give you the prereqs you need, but it would satisfy the
So
statute.
that's where like New Jersey student, because I graduated from McAllister. I did the online program, but
Mhm.
I have a bachelor's degree before I even went from years ago, and that was a non-issue. But I never realized, like, say, like what you just said, if you graduate high school and you're like, oh, I just want to go to McAllister, or like, you know, I just think that's kind of crazy.
It's happened before, but the American board actually, I keep saying the American board is the American Board of Funeral Service Education. They develop our curriculum. They changed their standards a couple of years ago because this happened. They weren't really even aiming this at McAllister. There was a school out in like the Midwest somewhere that was like not informing students fully of what they needed for their particular state. So they put in their standards that you need any student that you have in your program, you need to find out what the requirements are in their home state or whatever state they're getting licensed, and
Mm-hmm.
that's what you need to follow. So they went as far as to specify that and make it part of the accrediting standards, meaning if a school doesn't do that now, their accreditation is in jeopardy. So it's something that really doesn't happen too much anymore, and that but just because the regular, or I'm sorry, the standards that are put down by the accreditor. But
Mm-hmm.
it has happened in the past, unfortunately.
Well,
Doesn't happen often, but it has.
okay.
But since you already had a bachelor's ahead of time, that's a non-factor.
Yeah, but I was thinking about like all the people who don't. Like that's especially if they're not in the state of New York like me. I was in New Jersey. Like that just kind of sucks.
Well, I'm sure they probably told, or what they probably did is they looked at your transcripts. They saw that you had the bachelor, so they probably didn't need to go through well, you need the 60 credits. They saw that you had it, so they
No, I
just
just
moved.
feel bad for the people that do. It's a lot.
I agree with it, but it's it's New Jersey has I think the highest regulations of any state. Now, given there are three states that require a bachelor's degree, but outside of that, New Jersey has by far the strictest regs when it comes to getting licensed. But
Mm,
the counter argument to that would be, which again, I would definitely be in favor of changing all of this, but the
mm,
counter argument would be, I would take the Pepsi challenge with any other state in the union as far as the work that comes out of New Jersey. Anybody that's ever gotten a body shipped up to you from Florida, my God, I don't know what they're doing down there, but they're not embalming bodies very well. So it is a higher
but
standard,
I
but
wonder if that has something to do with the water.
well, what do you mean?
Well, because you know how like up here, like from if you're from New York, like they're like, oh, the bagels are great, and then you go to Florida, like the bagels are shit because they say it has something to do with like the water, the
Oh, the
quality of the water.
water. Oh,
Maybe
I
the
see what
water
you're
down
saying.
there has something to do with the embalming.
Yeah, I'd
I mean,
like to,
I get that there's like water conditioners for that that you can like pre-inject with and stuff, but
that's and I don't want to say everybody in Florida is a bad embalmer, but every funeral director I know that's gotten a body from Florida has been like, yeah, there's been issues. Not
yeah,
every time, but quite frequently. They're just not embalmed to the same standard for some reason.
yeah.
And you would think they would be great at it. Like they call Florida God's waiting room, you think they would be top notch at it. But
Funny,
it
The
is,
waiting room.
yeah, right.
hilarious.
But it is what it is, yeah.
Yeah,
Thanks for going
Flanagan,
over that.
he always makes fun in the classroom. Like you go south of North Carolina and the bodies that come from there, they are horrible.
Yeah, it's crazy. And every time I've dealt with a family, they go, "Oh, that's he passed away in Florida." I'm like, "Oh," and I've gotten bodies that have been decent out of Florida. I don't want to say every body that comes out of Florida is a train wreck, but I've seen some real train wrecks come out of Florida.
Mm.
Yeah.
All right, so interns and preceptors, again, as of 2019, I should really update these. It is what it is, but preceptors cannot be convicted of a crime within the past 5 years. Now, when they say crime, this means it has to be a crime related to funeral service or moral turpitude. And moral turpitude is when you get into crimes that are real bad stuff, rape, murder, things like that. Now, if it's a crime related to funeral service, meaning let's say you empty out your pre-need funds, you go down to Atlantic City, you put it on black, red comes up, you lose all that money, you get arrested for it. Yeah, that's what they would be looking for. They don't want somebody like that being a preceptor. So they go, yeah, let's give you 5 years. Let's wait it out. Let's let you take a breather for 5 years before you start teaching the next generation how, what's what. You cannot have your license revoked, suspended, or surrendered from any professional board. Meaning that if you were a barber and you had your license, revoked as a barber, they're not going to let you become a preceptor in funeral service. I know they're completely not related fields, but that's the way they view it. They go, look, if you've had your license revoked in any profession, we don't want you really, to be leading the next generation of funeral directors. Which I can understand. It is what it is, but it really doesn't come up much. Like I said, these are things that you'll see on the test that you really won't see a lot in the real world. Now, in terms of preceptors, continued intern application. Oh, this is just the intern application is now available on the state board's website. The preceptor used to have to request it in writing, and this went back to some issue in the 1970s where somebody registered themselves at a funeral home without the funeral home's knowledge. So they're like, yeah, we're putting the kibosh on that. We're not even giving the application unless the funeral home requests it. They've relaxed on that, and they go, all right, look, you can just the application's there, it's online. So and they used to ask questions about that. I don't know whether they'll ask questions on it, but it merits at least mentioning it, warrants at least mentioning it. Now, convictions and arrests after 2019, licensees are now required to notify the state board in writing within 30 days upon conviction of any crime or arrest, summons, indictment, admission into pre-trial intervention guilty plea to any violation of law, ordinance, felony, DUI, misdemeanor, or disorderly offense in New Jersey or any other jurisdiction, meaning that if you get arrested for anything, you got to tell the state board. The only thing they don't care about is if you get a speeding ticket or a parking ticket. They don't care about that. Given if you're driving 140 miles an hour or something like that, and because they can arrest you if you drive like crazy fast, like if it's that serious an offense, yeah, you would have to report it to them. But generally, they're not concerned with traffic issues. If you've got a lead foot, they really don't care about that. But if you get like a DUI or something like that, or if you're arrested, I don't know, a disorderly conduct thing or pretrial intervention. I'm not even 100% with that. I think that's if you get. I think that's a plea down situation. Like if you get charged with something, and they go, look. Instead of this being on your record for the rest of your life, if you are good for the next 2 years or something like that, we'll drop this off of we'll drop the charges on it. So even if you're admitted into a pretrial intervention program, you even have to disclose that to the state. The way that it used to be, just to give you a reference point, the way that it used to be was that you would have to every time you re-upped your license, you would have to disclose it to them then. And that used to make for some great reading in the forum because they would publish this in the forum. So every other year, when everybody re-upped their license, the next issue of the forum would have the last 2 years, everybody who had a run-in with the law. And it was great. You would read because again, there's so many gossipy Pete's in this line of work. It's a very small community. Everybody knows everybody. So it's word travels so darn fast in this line of work. But anyway, you do have to disclose that within 30 days. If you have some issue with the law, you got to tell the state board in within 30 days. Um, Now, the state board also clarified intern responsibilities, participating in funeral arrangements, preserving, washing, or disposing of dead human bodies, making funeral arrangements on behalf of any licensed practitioner of mortuary science, right? So what they're saying there is you don't have to just work under your preceptor. If you're at a funeral home and there's 5 directors there, you can work under all 5 of them. You don't have to just be under your preceptor. Like when I was an intern, my preceptor, he was the owner, and but he was up there in years. He was in his 60s at the time. He had actually sold the business to SCI, and he was only around maybe 6 months out of the year. Like the rest of the time, he'd be down in like the Carolinas playing golf, and good for him. But he would, and he probably shouldn't have done this, but he would like pre-sign a bunch of the forms for me. And I wouldn't do fake work. I mean, everything I did was legitimate, but it was a situation where he wasn't there to oversee everything. As it is now, I could have just had the other funeral director basically oversee the work that I was doing, which would have made more sense, but it is what it is. Um, Interns and advertisements and or business cards. If an intern is an ad and that it includes a website or any social media, um, the intern has to be listed as John Doe NJ intern registration number and whatever your intern number is. So if you have a business card, perfectly fine. You just have to have that on there. If you're on the website, perfectly fine. You just have to be on there. If your funeral home has like a Facebook page or I don't know, Instagram or whatever, then you have to have, if you're listed on there, that's how you would have to be listed. Forms of ownership. And this, you're not going to see a whole lot on this. I should really get rid of this one. Different styles of ownership, corporate. You always have to have that, regardless of the ownership structure, you always have to have a manager. And you can either have a manager, a senior director, or I believe executive director. And there's a different slide where we'll go through those. Yeah, you have to pick one of those three and stick with it. Like you can't have a manager and a senior director. It's one or the other. And if you don't want to have the wording manager, you can change that to senior director or executive director, but it's one of the three. You have to pick the one, and that's how it has to be listed. The death of the owner, you have to notify the state, I believe, and I cannot remember the number. I want to say it's 14 days, but actually, no, I believe it's 30 days, but I could be wrong on that. And I leave that one open-ended, so you'll look it up. That's something you will most likely see on there. I believe it's 30 days, but I could absolutely be wrong on that one. Um, a new installation, we'll get into that in just a bit. A new installation is basically a new business. If, let's say, you purchase a funeral home and it's an existing funeral home, when you buy that, the state board views that as a new installation and they view that as a completely new business. Now, people in the community won't. If it's Brand X Funeral Home that's been there since 1910 and they buried their father and their grandfather or great grandfather out of there, they just view it as Brand X Funeral Home. But the state board views that as a new installation. Same is true if you move your establishment. Let's say you've got your funeral home, you're on this block, it's nice, but a spot opens up three doors down and it's a nicer building. You buy it, great. We're going to move our funeral home three buildings down. That's wonderful. People in the community will just view that as the same funeral home. It just moved over a little bit. Fine. The state board will view that as a new installation. It's a new business in their eyes, meaning that you have to do everything with a new registration. You have to get a new certificate of registration. An inspection of it has to be done by the state board, all that jazz. If you close a funeral home, I've got a later slide on that as well. There are specifics on that, like you have to cover up the sign, you have to make sure that the phone number is turned off, you have to notify everybody in your pre-need files that you're closing. And I have a later slide that goes through the specifics on that, and that's something you will most likely see on the test. And there again, go back and look this stuff up. Unlicensed owners, you're absolutely allowed to have an unlicensed owner. You don't have to have a licensed owner funeral home. Anybody can own one. The way I always remember this when I was a kid, my dad was a funeral director. He shed this mortal coil many years ago. My mom was not licensed at the time. She went up to Mercer and got licensed, but for those 3 years that she was in school, she was not licensed. She still owned the place. She had somebody else managing it. Perfectly fine, perfectly legal. Nothing wrong with that.
So wait, you're saying for
Professor
the
Doyle, I just looked up. It says 5 days you have to notify the board if the manager changes or manager dies. But for the owner, I don't see it in over here. And I don't know why. I think it's like 10 days somewhere.
I Okay, double check it though, because I think it's different with the owner versus the manager, but double
Okay.
check that. 5 days seems more reasonable, and I think it would make a lot more sense because, if somebody dies, you need somebody there at the helm. But
Yeah.
at least it used to be 30 days, and I'm going back a couple years here. That's why I'm saying double check these things. I intentionally leave that off of there. If it is 5 days, fantastic. That makes much more sense. But yeah, I'm almost certain it used to be 30 days. And again, if it's currently 5 days, fantastic. That makes a lot more sense.
Maybe if the owner was not licensed or the manager, then there it is not such an urgency, right, to notify, right? But if the
Exactly. And
person is licensed,
that's most
mm,
likely the rationale for why they would
uh-huh.
give a longer period if the owner
Okay.
dies. If the owner's
Mm-hmm.
not licensed, they're not the manager, the state really doesn't care who owns the place. I mean, they want to know, but
Yeah.
it's not a matter of urgency as it is with a manager.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
The same is true. Like a funeral director can just up and leave, and let's say you go on a cruise. Like, let's say you go on a cruise for 2 months. Great,
Mm-hmm.
good for you, man. The manager cannot do that. The manager can, but you got to notify the state board. I'm
Yeah.
going to be gone for more than 30 days because of
Yeah.
X, Y, and Z. Same is
Mm-hmm.
true as an intern. If you're going to be gone for more than, I want to say it's 30 days. As an
Yeah.
intern, you have to notify the state board within 5 days. And
That is
me,
within 10 days. That is
is it
like you
within
have to
10
know
days? Okay, thank
within
you.
10 days. Yeah.
Because I've always said let's say you were in a terrible car accident, you're in a coma,
Hmm.
right? And the doctor
Yeah.
comes in, he looks at the chart and goes, he's going to be in a coma for 30 days. Well, within those 10 days, you need to pop out of the coma, write a letter to the state board that I'm going to be in a coma for the next 30 days, and then you can go back into the coma for the rest of the time. I know that makes no sense, but it's sort of the way the law is written.
can you just go over the first example again of new installation? I'm just like a little.
Yeah,
Like the
sure.
second one, I understood. Like you said, like if they just move their location, even though it's still technically under the same registration, like it's got to be a new installation. Like I get that. What was Can you just go over the first one again? I'm sorry.
Sure. The first one is, let's say you go and you buy a funeral home, right? You go and buy Brand X Funeral Home. I don't know where you work currently, but well, let's say you just go, you won the lottery yesterday, you go and buy the place. Good for you, all right? Well, that funeral home might have been there since 1910, and everybody in the community will view it the same way. Fantastic. The state board will not, though. They view that as a new installation.
So
They view
even if
that,
you buy an older funeral home and you purchase it and you keep the previous name, it's still considered a new installation.
yes, yes,
Okay, now I
exactly.
understand. Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
And it's just them sort of staying on top of, sort of who's on first, who owns this place, who's calling the
Yeah.
shots, who's running the show.
Mm-hmm.
All right, pre-need. Obviously, you have to be licensed, signatures on forms. With the statement of goods and services, people have to sign that if you are giving out, unless you're giving out a price quote. If you look at a statement of funeral goods and services, it has at need, pre-need, and price quote. There's three little check marks there, right? So if it's a pre-need situation and you're doing pre-need, whether that's paid or not paid, right? Let's say it's not funded. Somebody comes in and they go, I just want to get everything down on paper. Perfectly fine. Okay, you would need to get their signature on that statement of funeral goods and services. It does not commit them anything to anything financially to you, but it's just a matter of they understand, okay, here's what the proposal is as far as your funeral services, and here's what the estimate is on the cost. Now, they give you an option on their price quote. The reason they give you that is I had somebody come in once and I knew I happened to saw him. I happened to see him come out of my competitor. My competitor was directly across the street from us. And I just happened to be, and I happened to notice him coming out of the competitor's place. And he came over and knocked on our door. And I sat down with the fella, and he was a nice enough guy. And he asked me for a price quote, or he wanted to see how much would it be to bury mom, do X, Y, and Z. So I wrote him up, a thing. And I was like, it's not a thing, but like, would you mind signing this? He was like, I don't want to sign anything. I was like, you're not, I'm not committing you to anything. It's just sort of and I explained it's a state thing, blah, blah, blah. He's like, I just don't want to sign it. He didn't even want to give me his name. So I said, all right, look, and I checked the price quote. And being a price quote, that means you're just giving a price quote. That means it's not really technically a pre-need thing because you're just giving a price quote. It'd be the same thing if somebody called you up and just said, hey, how much is a direct cremation? You go, oh, it's $2,000. They go, great, thanks. And they just hang up and you really don't get any information from them. So they give you that option. But in the vast majority of cases, you're going to need to have a signature of the customer on that statement of goods and services for pre-need. That makes sense because it's pre-need funded or not, you would need their signature unless it's just a price quote. Now, trust accounts. We'll get into the minutia of that in just a bit, but trust accounts are just an option. You have trust accounts. You can. I've had students tell me they use just a local bank. You can have a POD account, a payment on death account, meaning you give folks an estimate on their funeral charges. Let's say it's $10,000. They go down to the local bank. They show them that, they give them $10,000. You can invest the money that way. It's perfectly fine. Now, many funeral homes in New Jersey use a trust. A lot of them use it because of choices, which is through the association. So there's a lot of money in it. Last I heard, there was something like $300 million in it. So it performs very well just because of the vast amount of money that's in it. With trusts, and there's a magic number with it and I'm getting a little ahead of myself here. With trusts, once you get above 200 accounts in a master trust, the trust can then fund itself. And we'll get into the specifics on that in just a bit. But the 200 is the magic number when it comes to trust accounts. If you have a master trust account with 200 or more accounts in it, you can then take a percentage of the interest to fund the trust itself. And I'll explain why here in just a minute. Changing of a funeral home. If somebody comes in and they tell you, I don't like it anymore. I want to use brand Y instead of brand X. Okay, fine. You've got a certain amount of time that you have to, let's say it's pre-funded. You have a certain amount of time to then transfer those funds over to the other funeral home. I want to say it's 14 days, but look that one up. I don't know it off the top of my head. That's another one I leave off of here intentionally. The pre-need ledger. The pre-need ledger, it's good to review what's required in there because a pre-need ledger needs to have, like, let's say somebody comes in, they pay for a funeral or they prepay for a funeral. Well, you have to keep a record of that. So in that pre-need ledger, it needs to have the name of the person who paid, the name of the decedent or no, the person for who will be deceased at some point, how much money was initially put in there, how much money is currently in there. There's a certain amount of information that has to be in there. So it's good to review what's on there because that's all fair game for questions. Cancellation fee, that's you can't have it. You cannot charge for anything. If a family comes in, and I've had this happen, and they sit with you for 4 hours making pre-arrangements, the next day they call you and they go, or maybe they don't even call you. You just get a call from the competitor going, "Yeah, I've got the Jones family." Oh, you get nothing out of that. It is what it is. It's set up for consumer protection. It's a drag. I've always felt maybe we should be able to get like $100 or something if you spend like 4 hours with the family, but it's all done for consumer protection. The idea being that a family can have all the confidence in the world coming in and cutting a check to a funeral home because even if they change their mind, the funeral home has to give them back all their money and all the interest. At 100% pre-need trust, meaning there are some states that somebody comes in and let's say they pay for a $10,000 funeral. I'm just using $10,000 because it's a round figure. And there are certain states that allow you to take a certain percentage right off the top, basically for your troubles. Like you want to take $1,000 right off the top, fine. New Jersey does not. They do 100% of everything given to you has to go into a trust or into an insurance policy or however you are vesting that money. 100% of it has to go into. You can't keep a penny of it. When the funeral actually happens, then you can charge for your services, but you can't charge for anything in a pre-need capacity. It doesn't mean now the only time that you can receive money in a pre-need situation is if it is a new insurance policy and if that company then gives you I'm blanking on the word. A commission. I don't know why I couldn't come up with that. If you get a commission on newly issued insurance policies, that's from the insurance company to you. That's fine. But you cannot take any of the money that the family gives you and keep it for yourself. Like I said, even if they're a real pain in the ass and you spend 6 hours with them, you can't keep a penny. Sorry, go ahead.
But for that, I think, Professor Daly, you have to have the insurance agent license, right?
That's true. That is true. And it's not a bad thing to get. I know it seems a lot to get another license, but it only takes like a week or two to get that license.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Back to the change of funeral home. Did you say there's like X amount of days a funeral home has to?
Yes. And I want to say it's 14, but I could be wrong on that. That's why I'm saying double check me on that one.
So you would
14, you have to return all the money in 14 days if they request cancellation for the revocable contract.
Fatima, how would I teach this without you? Thank you. I do appreciate it. I'm not being facetious. I really do appreciate that.
wait, what did she say?
Oh, sorry. I want to help my fellows.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it.
Wait,
Marnie,
what?
she said 14 days.
Yeah.
14 days. For
Me,
irrevocable, not revocable.
it doesn't matter because let's say a family comes in, and even if it's an irrevocable situation, and they come in and they go, "We don't like you. We want to use the guy across the street." That means you got to transfer those funds over to the guy across the street within 14 days.
So it doesn't matter what kind of trust. It just any kind it has to go in
Yeah.
14 days.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
All right, thank you.
Sure. So trust issues, they're saying there's that magic number, right? So if like if you look at choices, choices has thousands and thousands of accounts in it. I'm not trying to turn this into an advertisement for choices. I've just always found them very easy to work with. But at that point, 200 plus, that means that that trust is allowed to take 1% of the interest to then fund itself. Because if you've got that many accounts, you're going to need somebody to manage them. You're going to need somebody to look after them, to send the paperwork out to the families every year, to send the paperwork out to the funeral homes on a monthly basis. Like there's a lot of paperwork that goes into that. So at that 200 mark, they go, look, there's enough work here that you could take 1% of the interest to then fund to pay for somebody to take care of all of these accounts.
So these 200 accounts have to be from the same funeral home, right?
No,
For
no,
them
no,
to.
no. No,
Mm.
they can be from many, many funeral homes. Like
Okay.
choices that has hundreds of funeral homes in it, or I'm guessing hundreds, but many, many funeral homes in it. And that's choices is run through the state association. And again, I'm not trying to make it a commercial for choices, but even if as a funeral home, if you were, I used to work for a company that had their own trust. And at the time, they owned like 35 funeral homes or something, and they had more than 200, accounts in there. So even as an individual funeral home, if you have a trust that large, you have more than 200 accounts in it, you can then
Mhm.
take 1% of that interest to
Okay.
fund the work that needs to be done. But
Okay.
like I said, I'm thinking of choices in this particular case where that's run by the association and they've got thousands and thousands of accounts in there. So they need somebody that's somebody's full-time job is looking over those accounts. So you got to pay them somehow. So they take 1% of the interest to then fund the management of those accounts. So now commissions. Commissions can only be given on newly issued insurance. And as Fatima said earlier, you have to have an insurance license to do that. It's not a bad idea to get an insurance license. I used to have one. I let it lapse years back just because I wasn't I don't make as many arrangements as I once did. Um, but it's a nice option to have. But if you write, if somebody comes in and they give you $10,000 to in a pre-need situation, and you put it into an insurance policy, a newly issued insurance policy, which, and again, you don't need to get into the minutia on it, but it tends to be what they call a single pay whole life insurance policy, meaning it's a $10,000 policy. You put $10,000 into it, and then in those situations, that insurance company will issue a commission to the agent that wrote that policy. You're not taking anything from the family. The family wrote $10,000 to them. They still have access to that $10,000. It's that insurance company giving you a kickback, not a kickback, giving you a commission on the work that you've brought to them. But if somebody comes in and they already have an insurance policy, let's say they've got that whole life insurance policy, it's been paid up for whatever reason, it's all paid up and it's sitting there, it's worth $200,000 or something like that. Um, you can't then take that and let's say you convert that into a trust. You can't keep a percentage of that for yourself. It's only on newly issued insurance policies wherein somebody comes in, you as a funeral director and as somebody who has an insurance license, you write a new insurance policy. Under those circumstances, you can get a commission. Anything else with pre-need, you can't get any money up front. It's just, I mean, you can get money to pay for the funeral, but you can't keep any of it. It's got to go somewhere, where it's completely out of your hands. So that if you have a lousy month at the funeral home, you can't dip into those funds to, make ends meet.
Like, how much would you make in a commission?
It depends. There are people that I know funeral directors that that's all they do. Like I used to work with a guy who he loved the funeral business, but he hated getting up at 2 in the morning to make removals. I don't blame him.
Yeah.
But what he did instead was he started writing insurance policy pre-need for a bunch of funeral homes in the area. So he worked like he was not on staff technically for these funeral homes, but in a way he was. There was
He
pretty
was
there's
like
he
being
probably
contracted in or something, right? In a way.
what do you mean contracted in?
Like 1099, like they're kind of working for themselves, but they do work for the funeral home versus being an employee of the funeral home.
Yeah, they're sort of what they're
Yeah.
doing is they're really working for the insurance company and
Yeah.
like it's almost like doing trade work. Like if a funeral home calls you
Yeah.
up and says, "Hey, can you embalm a body for me?" Okay, great. Yeah, you just go in. You're not really their employee. You're
You're contracted here, 1099. Yeah.
exactly, you're a subcontractor.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. That's a real good way to think of it.
But
And
like, how much would he make? Like, I'm just out of sheer curiosity because I've never like, you know, I'm starting to the lights being shined on this. Like, I heard about it even a few weeks ago.
sure,
It's
sure.
like, so like,
I
how much would like
it
like that
run
guy you said? How much would he do?
I don't know. I don't
You don't
know
know?
per. I know that the younger the person, the more you would get on the commission. If somebody comes in and they're like 42 years old, you're going to get a real good kickback on that, a real good commission, I should say. I shouldn't say kickback. You're going to get a real good commission. If somebody is
Like, is it like a
93,
thousand dollars or something?
sometimes, yes, I mean, and
Really?
I
Wow.
don't know the specifics on it because I used to have an insurance licensed and I've written them. I've gotten commissions, but it wasn't my main line of work, so I never really
Yeah.
paid it a lot of attention. It would be
Hmm.
like I'd get a check and be like, oh, I can, I was younger at the time, like, oh, I could take my girlfriend out with this or something. You know what I mean? But it's
Because I
um,
feel like pre-need, isn't it like, unless you're like, I get it, it's like a Medicaid situation and like a person, parents going in a nursing home and they're getting rid of all the assets, like that I would understand. But I feel like, especially like my generation, like millennials, like they're not doing that. Like I feel like pre-need is like becoming less and less. I feel like that's more of like a boomer thing or Gen X.
maybe it
Correct me
is.
if I'm wrong. Like I don't know.
Maybe it is. Maybe millennials are just too young to be,
Yeah.
start doing that. I don't know. I know that I know a couple fellows that do. They just do. Actually, I knew two brothers that do this,
Yeah.
and that's all they do. They just do pre-need. The one guy wrote so much pre-need. I think he was working for Forethought. Forethought gave him like a free trip to Hawaii. They gave him a
Oh
cruise. He
wow.
got all sorts of great stuff out of it. Now he was writing a ton of policies. And he was working for some pretty big funeral homes. And we used to use a guy, actually his brother, who was a real nice guy and a great arranger. And it was beneficial to us in that like somebody called up, oh, I need to make pre-need. It'd be one less thing I would have to deal with if I was dealing with five at-need families. I could say, oh, we'll have our pre-need specialist call you. And I'd call him up and go, hey, Don, can you give this family a call? And he'd be like, yeah, sure. And he would just handle it and it would just be one less thing for me to worry about. But he would write it all into insurance and he would get the commissions off of it, and he made a pretty good living out of it. Now I've never asked him, the specifics on that, but I mean, you can do just that if you choose to.
Yeah.
So it's all food for thought. And getting that insurance license is not a difficult thing. Like it's not like getting a funeral director's license. It's you take a couple classes and you have to take a test, and it takes like maybe 2 weeks to get it. So it's really not that involved of a thing. And again, I'm going back probably 25 years. It may have changed in that amount of time,
Yeah.
but but it's worth
That's way
looking
more
into.
simpler to get than like you said, a mortuary license. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, by far. Yeah.
Okay.
So, POD accounts, that's just payable on death or payment on death. That's just open up at a local bank. Perfectly legal, perfectly fine to do. Most funeral homes I know tend to use a trust or insurance, but there's nothing illegal about just having them, you write up a total and you go, hey, go down to the bank and just put the money in there. Just open a POD account. Perfectly legal. Kind of rare these days, but again, there's nothing wrong with it. Now, okay, more 2019 changes. Must notify social services when any refund on an irrevocable prepaid funeral. It used to be if it was $500 or more, meaning that in an irrevocable situation, so you've got an irrevocable pre-need, it turns into at need, you do the whole service, and there's $499 left. You could just cut a check back to the family. The funeral home could never keep that money. You can never keep money that is not yours. You never keep money that's not specifically put onto that statement of funeral goods and services and directly charged to the family. But if you tally everything up and there was extra money, you used to be able to just cut a check to the family if it was less than $500. Now, even if there's a penny left, you have to notify social services and they basically want that money. I can understand the theory, but I mean, the idea behind it is realistically, the most expensive 3 years of your life will be the last 3 years because of medical care. And I mean, this is assuming that you don't die at 28 or 29, if you live to a ripe old age, which the vast majority of people will. The last 3 years of your life will be the most expensive because your medical bills. If you're living in a nursing home, even those they easily charge 10, 15, $20,000 a month. Let's say somebody has their house paid off, they've got, they're let's say they're worth a $500,000. You'll burn through that pretty darn quickly. That's why a lot of people will come in and set up a pre-need funeral, which makes sense. But the state does not want a family to use that as a shelter for those funds. Prior to the year 2000, what people were doing is they would take, like, let's say $300,000 and they would put that into a pre-need funeral and go, great. At the time of the funeral, they would spend 10,000. Funeral home would cut them a check back for 290,000. they closed the loop on that pretty fast. They were like, yeah, we're not going to do that because the way the state views it is, look, if we're going to, if the state of New Jersey is going to pay for your medical expenses, we don't want you hiding funds from us, which I think is a reasonable position for the state to take. But like I said, at the end of the day, if there's any money left over in an irrevocable situation, the state is going to want it. So you need to notify social services when there's even a penny left. You got to notify them. Now, advertising. The advertising regs, you're probably going to see questions. I can almost guarantee you're going to see at least a question on this. So the name that you are on any ad, you have to have your name as it is registered with the state board. If you are a Brand X funeral home and you decide one day, I don't like the word funeral, I want to change it to Brand X Memorial Home. Well, that's fine. That sounds like a nice name. Great. You have to change it with the state board before you change it in your advertising. Like you can't just go out and just change it and just call yourself, it's Brand X Memorial Home now. You can do that, but you just have to change your name with the state board. Again, not even a terribly complicated process. It's just the state board wants to know exactly what your funeral home name is. So whatever your name is registered with the state board, that's how it has to appear in the ads. The manager has to be listed in any ad along with their license number. Now, novelty items like a pen or my uncle, Paul Budd, who I was talking about earlier, he used to make golf tees, right? And it would just say Budd Funeral Home on it, Woodbury, New Jersey. And that's all you would need because they're so small that you can't have like the full address and the telephone number and the manager's name, the license number. So if it's a small novelty item like a pen or a golf tee or something really, really small like that, you can have just the name of the funeral home and what municipality is. Anything other than that, you have to have all of the information in it. And the same is true with logos and obituaries. Now, this is becoming increasingly rare as people tend to not use print media that much these days. I mean, and it's kind of a good thing. I never thought I'd see the day and age where, like, my mother, who I was talking about earlier, she's going to be 86. She's on Facebook. God, she stalks me on Facebook. I'm like, my God, lady, do you have find something else to do with your time? But it's something that even the older generation, they're all digitized. It used to be everything was in the newspapers, and if you ran an ad, and I'm going to show you an example here in a bit. If you had an ad in an obit, meaning a picture, an emblem, your logo, then that was considered an advertisement, and the funeral home would have to pay for that because they were like, the family shouldn't have to pay for that. I'm going to show you an example here in just a second. Now, testimonials. You can have testimonials all you want, but you have to have served that family. Like, you can't just go get like I don't know. I don't know. I'm down in South Jersey, so we're all Eagles fans. Like, you can't go get Jalen Hurts. It'd be great to have Jalen Hurts in an advertising for you saying, yeah, Brand X Funeral Home is swell. That'd be wonderful. But you can't do that unless Jalen has actually used the funeral home, right? Now, if he's used the funeral home, you can hit him up and ask him for it. But if you're just paying him you can't do that. They have to have used the funeral home. Now, price reductions. This is another odd one. You can only advertise a price reduction. You can't advertise a price reduction if the price has been altered within the last 30 days. Here's what their fear is. This and I this would not happen a lot in funeral service, but this is what their fear is. Let me back to my whiteboard. Okay. So their fear is this. Let me just erase all of this. I'm sure there's a way to just hit refresh to do this, but I'm an idiot and I don't know how to do that. All right. So let's say you have a casket on your showroom floor, right? And the casket, you're selling it, I don't know, $600, right? So $600. Right. So you look at it one day and you go, you know what? I'm gonna market. I'm gonna change the price on this. I'm gonna make this $1,200. I'm gonna double the price of it. But you run an ad saying, hey, if you make arrangements with me, if you come in, if you pick this casket, I'll give it to you at half the cost. It's only 50% of it. I'll sell it to you for only $600 rather than the $1,200 that it's listed as. That's what their fear is. If you wanted to do, and I've never seen a funeral home run an ad campaign like this. If you wanted to do that, what you would have to do is you would have to mark it up to the $1,200. You'd have to wait 30 days and 30 days. And then if you wanted to advertise, oh, you can come in and get this at half off at $600 versus the $1,200 that I'm currently selling it at, that's fine. You have to have a 30-day buffer there, though. Again, this is one of these very dumb regs that really does not have any practical place in funeral service, but it's something where they could absolutely hit you up with a question on the JP exam. Does that make sense to everyone? Because it's a wonky one.
So basically, you cannot offer any discounts unless it has been up for the increased price for 30 days, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So
Okay.
you got to wait the 30 days and then you can do that.
Okay.
So again, and you don't I've never seen a funeral home actually run like a pricing scheme like that or an ad scheme like that, but it is what it is. I mean, I don't know. I don't understand all of the regs and why they have them the way that they do.
Maybe it's for the transparency reason, like they want the people to know that you actually upped it from 600 and now you're reducing it. You can't do it like you have
Oh,
to be there for longer period of time to basically gauge for them to gauge your intentions that you were actually planning this all along. I
I
don't know.
I
Could be.
agree with you. I agree with you. I just think it's a little overkill, but it is what it is.
They love to do that.
Yes, they do.
What was the thing with testimonials again? What were you saying with that?
Okay, you can have testimonials, but the person has to have used the funeral home. You can't just find a
Oh, you can't do
celebrity.
like fraudulent ones. Okay.
Exactly. Like,
Yeah.
let's say for some reason you're friends with Tom Cruise, right? That'd be cool. You have Tom Cruise in your funeral home ad. You can only do that if Tom has actually used the funeral home.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like, what if a regular person does that? Like, a fuel writes a testimonial. If the state is not gonna like verify it, are they?
Yeah, I know. I mean, here, well,
Right?
more than likely, here's what would happen. Your competitor would most likely report you to the state board in a situation like that.
Oh,
That
they
would
will
be my
report you.
guess.
Yeah, you can't have any enemies.
Oh man, and there are some shallow funeral directors in this world. One time we ran an ad, and then the following one we ran the same ad, and the newspaper when they ran it, they messed it up and cut the manager name out of. I was the manager. They cut my name out of the bottom. It was just a printing error. Our competitor mailed it to the state board, and we knew it was him because you get a copy of the complaint, and he was an older guy, so it was in handwriting, and I knew his handwriting. I was like, "Really, dude?"
Oh,
And we explained it to the state board, and the state board was like they chalked it up to a nuisance complaint, meaning that it was just somebody being a pain in their rear and our rear
uh,
essentially. And they're like, yeah, just make sure it doesn't happen again. So, all right, so logos and obits. This is what I was talking about. I'm not trying to pick on the nice folks at Chinoski Funeral Home. Actually, I think they closed that funeral home, but I'm not trying to pick on them. But it used to be common to see like an ad like this in an obituary printed in the newspaper. So if you had an ad like that where it actually had like your symbol, your image, your logo in the obituary, then you would have to pay for that. That's considered an advertisement. They say, look, the family shouldn't have to pay for your advertisement. And that makes
mm,
sense. It's
yeah,
understandable. So
yeah.
that's why it has to meet all the requirements of of an advertisement. It has to have the name of the funeral home, the name of the manager, the license number, all that jazz. Now, if you just wrote viewing 7 and 9 on Tuesday at Chinook Funeral Home, 1100 Black Horse Pike, that's perfectly fine. That's not considered an ad. When you put in an image like that, that's when it becomes an ad. This is becoming increasingly irrelevant just because most funeral homes are not putting things in the paper as much. Like it's really more putting things onto the website, which makes everybody's lives a whole lot easier. But it's still in the law, so you still have to know it. So, like I said, that's in that logo and obits there. And that was such a South Jersey thing. That was like really, I would see that in like the Courier Post and the Gloucester County Times. I didn't notice that as much like in like the Bergen Record or whatever it is up in North Jersey. Maybe it was. But I saw it much more commonly in South Jersey for some reason. So advertising. Advertising includes aerial displays. I've never seen this for a funeral home. Like when you go down to Wildwood or something, you see the plane drive by, you fly by, and it's got a sign on it, like "Eat at Joe's" or something like that. I've never seen one for a funeral home. But if you chose to, you would have to have the manager's name, license number, the full address, all that jazz, right? Circulars, handbills, flyers, letters, any other similar item, document, publication, or device used to communicate to the general public or to a specific group. New in 2019, all advertising regulations extended to the funeral home website and social media, which makes sense. If the funeral home has a Facebook page or I don't know, I'm not real good with social media. Twitter or whatever, then you would have to have all that, everything in it that's required in the ad. You'd have to have the manager name, license number. Like if you were listed, you'd have to have, intern license number, bop, 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 whatever. If somebody was not licensed, you would have to have the disclaimer in there. Um, Not licensed and legally not able to make funeral arrangements, embalm or direct a service. Like you'd have to have all that jazz in there, which I suppose makes sense. Now, fines. These are maximum fines. The maximum that the board can fine you, first offense is up to 10,000, second and subsequent offenses up to $20,000. Now, this also can include investigation costs. So again, you never want to get on the wrong side of the state. If they come after you and let's say they have to bring in a forensic accountant or something, they're not paying for it. They're going to make you pay for it. So always keep that in mind. But as far as fines, these are maximums. That's the most they can hit you with a single fine.
So, Professor Daly, is it the same offense? The second has to be the same offense, then it's 20, or if it's something else, it will be 10, or any like general.
I don't know. That's a good question. Now, the second offense is assuming that you're doing the same thing. And where I have seen this in the past, I'm not going to mention the funeral home. There is a particular funeral home I've seen get hit with this. And what they were doing is they had unlicensed people running services, embalming, and making arrangements.
Mm,
And they got popped $10,000 for it once, and later I did say they got popped $20,000 for it. Now I heard a whole bunch of funeral directors griping about this because they said it wasn't high enough. Their rationale was that, well, if they had hired somebody, if they were paying an employee, they would have paid that employee over the course of a year or two. You're going to pay them more than 20 or $30,000, so the fine should be higher. But that is what it is. And that tends to be when you would see a fine this high. Now, this is assuming, yeah, I'm pretty. It doesn't. I believe it does not specify in the statute that it has to be the same offense, but I think it's assumed that it would be the same offense. Because if they came after you for something else, like let's say you had somebody who was unlicensed running a service, that's a pretty serious offense, or
yeah.
embalming a body or something like that, or making arrangements. And let's say they come back and you don't have an aneurysm hook in the
Mm,
prep room. That's a much different thing. So it's
yeah.
assumed that it would be the same thing that you were doing.
Okay.
Yeah. But a good question, though.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right, to determine the depth of burial. Now, if you have this is the wording out of the regulation. If you have a properly constructed burial vault, there's no limit. There's no requirement for how much dirt needs to be on top of a casket. If you just put a casket or a body into the ground without a casket, if you just put them in a shroud, you have to have at least 4 feet of earth on top of them. Now, the way I remember this may help you, may not. I think of a casket. I know it's not an exact. I think of a casket about 2 feet high. I know it's a little bit more than that. But if you think about the bottom of a casket, then, right, the bottom of the casket would be about 6 feet under. So that's the way that I remember it. The top of it, you have to have at least 4 feet of earth on top of that individual. Let's assume the casket's about 2 feet. So it's about 6 feet under at the bottom. That's the way I remember it. Now, if it's a child, like a newborn or a 1-year-old, it drops to 3 feet 6 inches. Now, again, I don't know why we need to know this. We're not digging graves, we're not running a cemetery, but for whatever reason, the state makes you know this for testing purposes. Now, temporary burials. This is an option in New Jersey. When you're filling out a burial permit, let's say that you're going into a cemetery and they're building a mausoleum. And the person actually wants to go into the mausoleum, but the mausoleum isn't built yet. Well, you can mark that as a temporary burial. And if you do, the state gives you up to 4 years to wait for that mausoleum to be built, or let's say they're opening a new section of the cemetery. That's where the person wants to be buried. Whatever the reason is that the person has to be moved, and they're being moved within the same cemetery. If that's the case, you have up to 4 years to move them. And when you move them, you do not have to get a disinterment permit. Right? So this is a very rare thing. You're not going to see this a lot. Hence the reason I mention it, because there's not a lot of practical application for this particular regulation. So they give you up to 4 years on a temporary burial. If somebody, for whatever reason, is just being buried for a time period, they're waiting for a mausoleum to be built, I think would probably be the most common answer on that. So the survey says, you know,
So,
uh,
Professor Tilly, if somebody was buried in a wrong plot and the family wants to for them to be moved in a correct plot that they choose, then would they need a disinterment permit?
yes,
They
yes,
would, right? Okay.
yeah. Now, technically, actually, here's what we're gonna do. 1 second here.
Got it. Yes,
I,
yes,
I, I
I'm with
don't
it.
I don't want to admit to that and then put it onto
Yeah,
the
yeah, of
interwebs.
course. I get it.
God, especially in the day of AI and all that stuff, man. It's too
Yep,
scary.
yep.
But anyway, but yeah, so but even if the way that the regs are written, even if a cemetery goes in and let's say they're doing a multiple death burial, right? And let's say the first person has already been buried, you're going back in, they're putting a second person on top. Let's say they didn't put that first person deep enough and they need to bring that vault or that casket out to just dig the grave a little bit deeper. They're supposed to get a disinterment permit for that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in practical settings, many times it just happens and you're told about it afterwards. There's nothing you can do about that. It's already
Mm-hmm.
happened, you know.
Yeah.
So, but they are supposed to get a disinterment permit to make the additional room to get that second casket in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So now, if you have multiple burials, like if you've got, let's say you've got one person buried here, you've got another person underneath of them, and this person is who you want to disinter, you've got to get a disinterment permit for this person above them as well. Right.
Uh-huh.
So you've got
Yeah.
two people in a grave, right? But you want to get the bottom one out, you need to get a disinterment permit for the person on top as well. So you'll need
Mm-hmm.
two disinterment permits if you're pulling the second person out. Even if that first person is staying in that same grave, it doesn't matter. You're disturbing their grave, so you need to get a disinterment permit.
So why would people go for multiple burials, like to save the land, or the plots are cheaper that way?
A little bit of both, There are some cemeteries, I've only seen this once. There are some cemeteries that do triple death interments.
Oh.
Yeah, and I saw that once over. It was at Holy Cross over in Yaden, and like I was pallbearing on it, and
Mm-hmm.
we had professional pallbearers, which I was kind of glad about because looking down, 21, you think it's roughly 21 feet down, or about 20 feet down, and looking down like it's far enough. If you fell, somebody could get killed. Like it was scary.
Yeah.
It was so deep, and
Mm-hmm.
I have a little fear of heights as well, but. I mean, you get, but legally you're allowed to do that. If the ground will support it, if you're not digging directly into limestone, well, why not,
Yeah, I
Um,
know families have it. There's like families that have plots like that.
oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
If cemeteries offer it, yeah, families do that all the time.
yeah. I feel like that's pretty common, especially at maybe. I mean, I'm from North Jersey, and North Jersey is very common.
Real estate is much more valuable in North Jersey than it is in South Jersey. So it makes sense, you get
Yeah,
as much as you can out of any given space.
yeah,
So with disinterment, and remember, this is a New Jersey specific thing, and it's kind of bonkers. I was just talking about this in class last Wednesday. You need to get the consent of the spouse and all adult children. Prior to somebody being buried, if they have a spouse, that spouse is considered next of kin, they've got all legal control. and they make all decisions. As soon as the person is buried, the spouse only has the same amount of right as the rest of the adult children. So it says it right on the disinterment permit. It says like, okay, here's a name for the spouse, and also children are. Do you have all the children? Is there anybody who has not signed this? Like it asks you on there. So you have to get the next of kin. You have to get the spouse if the spouse is still alive, and all adult children to sign off on a disinterment permit, which is oddly specific to New Jersey. Like I know PA it does not require that. I don't think most states require it. I'm not sure why Jersey does, but I don't know why Jersey does most of the things it does.
So, Professor Daly, what about the authorizing aid, the funeral agent, right? Would he have any say in disinterment? Like, can he, or he's done after the burial is done?
That's a good question. Damn, that's a good question.
Yeah.
I don't have an answer for that one. Now my assumption, and I'm just assuming, it would be that once the person is buried, then they would then ooh, damn,
They
that's a
would
good
probably
question.
replace him with the spouse, because otherwise the spouse has the highest authority. Like if the funeral agent would take the like for disinterment, maybe the consent of the funeral agent and all adult children.
You know,
Or
I do not have an answer to that. That is a
mm,
really good question. I'm going to write a letter to the state board on that, just because I don't know. Now that being said, I can almost guarantee you're not going to see a question on the
of
jurisprudence
course.
about that. They're not going to say like, well, with a funeral agent in a disinterment situation, you're not. But I don't know. That's a really good question because when you establish a funeral agent, what you're saying is, look, for whatever reason, I don't trust like other folks in my family. You might
Yeah,
not even be saying that, but I trust that I want this person to make all decisions about where my body goes or what happens to my body after death. After they're buried, though, damn, that's a good question, Fatima. I don't know. I don't have an answer on that. Disinterment with funeral agent and children. That is a
Couldn't you like
really
get
that's
like
a
some sort of like power of attorney in place or something?
well, POA ceases at the time of death.
Yeah. But
Yes.
there's gotta be something else out there for like, I don't know.
Well, that funeral agent is the magic word. If somebody puts that into their will, if they
Mm,
say that they're a funeral agent, the New Jersey law specifically says the will doesn't even have to be probated. So long as it says this person is the funeral agent, they are in charge of everything. So long as it's the latest will. If somebody shows up with a will that's dated after that, yeah, that changes things. But if that's in
yeah.
the will, that person has all authority as far as the disposition of human remains in that scenario. What happens after they're buried, though? I've never even considered that. I don't know. That's a really good question. I'm going to draft a letter to the state board because I really don't have an answer. I bet you anything they don't have an answer to it, and they'll probably have to like take a month or two to think that one over. But I'm going to follow that one up at the state board, and I'll let you know how I make out with the Fatima because I don't know, man. That's a really good question.
see, I have one more question for
All
you.
right.
Like while we're talking about the wills and all, so let's say a person dies and he has a valid will and he appoints an executor for his will, right? And in that will, he has all the instructions for his funeral arrangements and all. So what happens and the will has not been probated. So who has the right of control on the funeral?
So you're
The
saying the person
executor?
has been named executor of the will?
Yeah, yeah.
Then
Hmm.
then it's still the next of kin. Executor of
Still,
the will is completely separate than being a funeral agent. It has to specifically say that they are a funeral agent or imply, like if somebody wrote in there, like if they didn't know the word funeral agent, but they wrote in their will, they knew enough to say, I want John Smith to be totally in charge of my funeral arrangements and control everything after death. That would most likely suffice. But funeral agent is the key word there. So an executor wouldn't have anything to say about, they wouldn't have any authority as far as the disposition is concerned. It's
okay.
when somebody's named funeral agent that that's changed.
And there is a separate form for funeral agent, right? That you have to sign in with witnesses or has to have it
No,
notarized and everything, right?
no.
Right?
You can just have because you can just have it written in a will, and a will. I mean, given it's better to have it notarized in the, in the presence of like two witnesses and have it notarized. But even if a will is not notarized, it's still an effective will.
Hmm.
So yeah, no, there's not a specific form that needs to be signed. It just needs to say, hey, John Smith is my funeral agent, and you're good to go.
Okay, all right. He has to use this term, funeral agent.
That's the
All right.
best way to do it. Yeah.
Okay.
And
Okay.
and and given if you described everything but you didn't know the word funeral agent, I think that would suffice. But funeral agent that's the end all catch all. If that's there, you're good.
Okay. So nothing can be done until the will is probated and all, right? So the funeral is gonna be delayed most probably.
No, 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 no. It says right in the regulation. Actually, it's a statute. It says in the statute the will does not need to be probated prior to this being enforced. So
Okay.
it is so because if you remember in New Jersey, you have to wait at least 14 days after
Hmm.
death, right? Or 10 days, which is really 14
10
days,
days,
right?
yeah. Hmm.
It's 2 weeks when you take in the weekends, all that jazz, right? But
Yeah.
you have to wait the 10 days, right? So, but what they're saying is you don't have to hold the funeral up 10 days. They say it
Okay.
doesn't even have to be probated. So long as it's written in the will, you're good to go.
Okay.
But that's a damn good question. I don't know about that disinterment question. That's a really good question. I don't have an answer, and I'm almost certain the state board does not have an answer. Well, I'm going to kick it over to them. Well, let's see what they say. This is going to be an interesting one.
I think they will make a law now
Maybe
stating
they
that.
will. If so, I'm gonna tell them I thought it up and get them to try and name it after me. I'm not mentioning
Yeah,
it all.
of
I'm
course.
lying.
Daly's
If
legislation or
they did
Daly's
that,
legislation.
I would give all credit to you, Fatima. It's a Fatima reg. Um, but all right. So cremation, right? The crematory, you have to have a licensee there. Like I said, this was relaxed during the pandemic, but it's back to where it was. You need to have a licensee there. Now, record keeping. If you look at the regs, there is a whole list of the information that the crematory needs to keep. And here again is another area where I specifically leave a blind spot for myself. It's things like the crematory has to keep like the name of the funeral home, the name of the decedent, the date of the cremation, the disposition of the cremated remains, meaning did they give them back to the funeral home? Did they give them to the family? Did they scatter them at sea on behalf of the family? There's a number of things that the crematory has to keep on file. And here again, I leave it as a particular blind spot for myself, so you'll look it up. You can find it in the regulations for funeral directing. That wouldn't be in the statutes, that would be in the regs. Now, unclaimed cremated remains in this wonderful state of New Jersey, after 1 year, you are legally allowed to dispose of them. Nobody does because that still leaves you open to liability. Even if you did everything right, somebody could still sue you over this. That's why most funeral homes tended to have cremated remains that are like from the 1940s, somewhere in the basement. But after 1 year, if you do your due diligence in trying to notify the family, meaning what they recommend is sending sort of at least one, if not two, certified letters to the family, like having them sign that they received it, saying, like, look, we have the cremated remains of your father, your husband, your brother, your neighbor, whoever it is, right? John Smith, and if we don't hear back from you by July the 27th, we are going to have them buried at the cemetery, or we're going to scatter them, or whatever you're going to do. That's perfectly legal. You have to dispose of them in a dignified manner, though. That's the one caveat there. Now, what they say is you can't just take them and go, well, your family thought you were trash, so I'm going to toss you in the garbage. No, you have to dispose of them in a dignified and respectful manner. So if you bought like a crypt at a cemetery and you put all of your cremated remains in there, perfectly fine to do, perfectly legal. If you took them and you scattered them, that again is legal, but that opens you up to liability where, 18 months after you scatter them, you could have somebody show up and say, well, I actually wanted my dad's cremated remains. And although they wouldn't show up for that whole year and a half you're trying to contact them, they would claim to an attorney that they can't sleep at night now because they don't know what happened to dad's ashes and they'll sue you over it. That's why most funeral homes tend to have these things. But legally, by the letter of the law, you are allowed to dispose of them after 1 year. And after you've made if you've done your due diligence in trying to contact the family.
Aren't you protected because the law allows you? You haven't done anything against the law.
Yeah, you are, but people can sue for anything at any time. And here's the scam. Here's why it works. Insurance companies, they just do an equation. They go, how much is it going to cost for us to pay the attorneys to pursue this? How much will it cost to get rid of these folks? Okay, if it's going to cost us 100,000 to pay for these attorneys, if we cut a check for 50 grand out to this family, it'll get rid of them. All right, just cut a check for 50 grand. That's the whole scam, which is unfortunate. I almost wish it was a law that if you brought a lawsuit against somebody, like you would have to actually take it through the court system. But that's unpractical. Though they would never, do something like that. But if they did, I bet you wouldn't see as many lawsuits as you do these days. But I'm just an old man complaining. So.
Mm.
All right, so the statement of funeral goods and services. So back in 2019, this is minutia, absolute minutia on my part. I doubt you're going to see questions about it. I just include it because really I include it because the state association made a big to-do about it. So, all right, so back in 2019, they changed a couple of things on the statement of funeral goods and services. The statement at the top, this statement is subject to change by agreement by both parties. That's pre-printed on the statement of funeral goods and services. The checkboxes for sex has been removed. It used to be male or female. Gender's gotten a little more complicated in the last couple of years, so they leave it a little more open-ended. Sanitary care without embalming has been changed to other prep of body. I highly doubt you're going to see questions on it. Just being thorough, I'm including it. Use of facilities and staff for viewing to visit as for use of facilities and staff for viewing has been changed to visitation. Added use of equipment and staff for graveside to the line, including accompaniment of remains to place of final disposition. Like I said, I'm really getting into minutia here. Receiving and forwarding remains are now on different lines. It used to just be on one line. Again, minor stuff. This is all pre-printed on the statement of funeral goods and services you get. Optional package section. If an optional package service is selected, categories 1 through 3 are not applicable. To if you select an optional package, see general price list for a list of included services. So every funeral director, when they saw this, the first question they had was, hey, if I have a package, like I have gold, silver, and bronze package or whatever, can I just write the gold, silver, and bronze package and I don't need to itemize it? And the state board immediately said, no, you're reading it wrong. You still need to itemize everything. So I'm not 100% sure why they changed the wording, but they changed it and it almost sounded like, hey, from a practical sense, this makes sense. We'll have to write less on the statement of funeral goods and services. And the state board immediately put the kibosh on that, said, no. You still need to itemize everything. You just need to have this disclosure on there. So other wording changes, and again, minor stuff. They changed clergy, church to efficient place of worship. Just more of an all-encompassing term. Newspaper notice to change to obituary charges. The word pallbearer has been removed. You can still write that in if you want to in your cash advances. Price reduction removed, but that can be written in. So instead of having price reduction automatically on the statement of funeral goods and services, they removed that, which makes sense because if, let's say, somebody didn't pick a package and they're looking at the statement of funeral goods and services, they go, hey, there's a line here for price reduction. Why didn't you use that? Like everybody likes to save money, right? So
Yeah.
they removed that. So if you are then reducing the price, you can write in price reduction, and that makes sense from a practical standpoint. Now, miscellaneous. All right, where do you file a death certificate? Now, remember, there's 3 places, 3 municipalities. The municipality of death, the municipality of the funeral home, and the municipality of disposition. And again, when you file a death certificate, it's from a drop-down box. So they don't even give you, like, you couldn't try to file it somewhere else. It's automatically there in EDRS, just from a drop-down box, right? The cost of the permit is $5. This is the only time I've ever seen in my life the state actually drop a charge because it was always $5. I mean, going back to when I was a kid, like in the 80s, it was $5. And around 2003, 2004, they upped it to $15. And they said, look, this is just going to be a temporary thing until we build EDRS. We're going to use this extra money to build EDRS. Once we're done with building EDRS, we'll drop it back down to $5. And everybody said, yeah, that's never going to happen. And they actually did it. They actually dropped it back down to $5. I'm still in shock. That's the only time I've ever seen the state reduce a charge, willingly reduce a charge.
What
Um,
were the three places to file the death certificate again?
sure. I'm sorry, the municipality of death, um, the municipality
Yeah,
of
the municipality of death, municipality of funeral home, and what was the last one?
the municipality of disposition. So wherever the cemetery or crematory or wherever however that decedent is being disposed of, wherever they're located, that municipality.
Okay,
Right.
thank you.
And sure thing. And also keep in mind, and not that it's off topic, but it remember that you can get like many. I'm gonna say most, but I can't qualify that statement. Many funeral homes get their certified copies from the state of New Jersey because the state of New Jersey charges $25 for the first copy and then $2 for each additional copy. Every municipality sets their own rates. So some of them will be like $30 for the first and $20 for each additional, right? So you don't necessarily have to get them at your local municipality, but like you can get them from the state of New Jersey, but you cannot quote unquote file the death certificate with the state of New Jersey. The death certificate has to be filed at one of those three municipalities. And the rationale behind it is that a local registrar will be more likely to pick up errors that would not be picked up at a state level. And here's what I mean by that. Like one time, I had a case where somebody died and I was in Riverside and this family was technically on the other side of Chester Avenue, which would make them in Delran, right? Now, when I filled out the death certificate, my portion read Riverside. The nurse put, and we shared a zip code. It was both 08075, right? So the nurse put Delran. Like she didn't know, she's not from the area, and she put Delran. Now, the local registrar, when she was filing it, she noticed it, she saw it, and she was familiar with the area. She said, wait, I know that house, or I know it's on the other side of Chester. She knew that it was in Delran. She contacted me. She rejected the death certificate. I contacted the nurse. We got the change made to it, and we filed it. Somebody at a state level, they're not going to know that. They're not going to be familiar with what this side of Chester Avenue versus that side of it. They wouldn't know that. So they make you file it locally, right? So it has to be accepted either at the municipality of the funeral home, the municipality of death, or the municipality of disposition. But you can order death certificates from either from any of those three municipalities, or you can order them from the state of New Jersey. That makes sense, everyone?
Yes. And
All
the
right.
cost of what kind of permit is $5?
I'm sorry?
What the cost of what permit were you talking about is $5?
A burial permit.
The burial, okay.
Yeah, the disposition permit. I mean, we always call them burial permits, but again, if you're cremating somebody, you need it's a disposition permit, I
Yeah.
suppose.
So regardless if you're cremating or burying, it's $5 because it's just technically umbrellaed under disposition.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay.
Now, this next line here, renting a funeral home to another. This happens all the time, and it's usually done illegally. Nobody makes a big to-do over it. I've never seen anybody fined over this. But what you are supposed to do, if one funeral home is renting another, is you are supposed to contact the State Board of Mortuary Science and request the use of another funeral home. And you have to give them a rationale for it. Like, I'm using this funeral home because let's say you have an aunt that lives in this town and, you're a funeral director and your funeral home is 80 miles away and you want to rent the local funeral home there to do your aunt's funeral. Happens all the time. Perfectly fine. Um, well, what you were supposed to do is request permission via the state board. Now, 99 out of 100 times, funeral homes just do it. They just call up the funeral home. Hey, can I rent the place? Yeah, sure, whatever, great. And everyone's happy. That's not what you're supposed to do. Now, I'm not calling the state board on anybody. I'm not ratting anybody out here or anything like that. But what you're supposed to do is request permission via the state board before you do this.
But I think,
Also,
Professor Daly, it's allowed to do it 3 times a year without informing the state board. If it's more than 3 times,
no.
then you have to inform.
No, 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 no.
No,
That's not.
really?
No, that is if you were using a private building. Like you
Oh,
can have a funeral, a viewing at somebody's house. There's no law that says you can. That's what people used to do. But if you're going to do it more than 3 times out of that same house, why are you using that house so many times? Then you need to request permission.
okay.
But renting another funeral home, you have to request permission of the state board, even if it's one time in 10 years. You're supposed to
Okay.
rent. And also keep this in mind. As a funeral director, you cannot rent another funeral home. It has to be a funeral home renting another funeral home.
Okay.
Here's the rationale behind it. Like they don't want like all right, I've since become very good friends with this funeral director, so I don't want to mention him by name, but I wanted to murder the guy at one point. We bought a funeral home, and this funeral director ran an ad in the local paper when the day we made settlement. He was managing the funeral home. He wanted to buy it. There was a falling out between him and the owner. I mean, it's the same old story. It happens a million times. It is what it is. So he felt he got, the shaft because he didn't get the option to buy the funeral home. And whatever, it happens, right? And we ran an ad in the local paper saying, "Congrats to the owner for selling. Hey, if anybody wants to change your funeral arrangements, you just call me." And he put his cell phone in there, and his idea was like, just call me and I'll embalm the body somewhere and I'll run it out of the local church, right? That's illegal as anything. You're not allowed to do that. And even then, I didn't report him to the state board, which I'm glad I didn't because I've become quite friendly with him since then. Everybody has a jerk moment here or there. What are you going to do, right? Nobody's perfect. But that's what they don't want. They don't want just Joe Schmo funeral director advertising them their wares. You can't do that. You have to be a funeral establishment offering your wares. You have to be a funeral establishment with your paperwork. You have to have a general price list, statement of funeral goods and services selected, everything with that funeral home's name on it, right? It has to be an established location. You can't just be a funeral director offering your wares to somebody, offering your services to somebody because it has to be emanating from a funeral home. That makes sense?
Mm-hmm.
So that's what they were trying to stop. That's what they were trying to stop with this idea that you're supposed to, you're supposed to be a funeral home renting another one, and also you just can't advertise yourself as a funeral director. Like, hey, I'm a funeral director. Just call me when call my cell phone. I'll find a funeral home when no, that's not allowed. It has to be a funeral home renting another funeral home running an ad. It has to be a funeral home running an ad for itself. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Now, this last line here. This was one of the dumbest things I've ever seen the state board do. I think they even admit that it was a dumb move on their part. A couple of years ago, somebody went into a funeral and there was plastics on the body. And when you put, let's say there was a union hole in the person, they took duct tape to keep the plastic down. Somebody looked up the sleeve, noticed the duct tape. They got very upset about it. They filed a complaint with the state board. So the state board, in a very knee-jerk reaction, said, "Yeah, well, you shouldn't be using duct tape, on a body. So what you need is clear, white, or flesh-colored adhesive tape." To which case, everybody said, "Well, what the hell is flesh-colored?" And the state board was like, each community can determine that for themselves. Like they had no idea what to say with that, yeah. But that was a complete knee-jerk reaction on behalf of the state board. But like I said, that popped up about 15 years ago. But students have told me they've seen questions about that, so I always make a note of it. And it's put in the annals of one of the dumber things the state board has ever done. All right, welfare versus Medicaid. We tend to call them Medicaid funerals. They're not. They're welfare. And that's what it is. The form used. Now they've changed the name of it. It used to be the PA 11, which a lot of times people look at them like Pennsylvania. No, it's Public Assistance 11, and they changed it back during the Bush administration, the second Bush administration, to Work First New Jersey 11. I doubt you'll see that on there, but I'm just including it just to be thorough. Now the amount, you should know the amount. And here again, I leave myself intentionally. I leave a blind spot here. Years ago, it used to be 2270. I know they've upped it to 3,000, I think, 3,000 something, but I don't
It's
know what.
$3,058.
There you go, 3,058. Now, that also changes for a stillborn, yeah, stillborn or a child that lives, I believe it's from being born like 1 minute up to 2 years, right? So there's three different amounts. So you have to know the amount that the state will provide to the funeral home, the amount that the state will provide to the cemetery or crematory, and then the amount that the family can contribute. The family used to be able to contribute 1570. I don't know what it currently is. It might still be 1570, but here again, I intentionally leave that as a blind spot for myself.
Professor Daly, where can we find the current amounts for these Medicaid? I was told that they ask these questions a lot, Medicaid questions. So where
Here's
can, yeah,
if
where can,
if you're not sure, I can. If you want to know, here I'll call my boss. Hold on, give me a second.
oh, okay, that would be great.
And by my boss, I mean my wife.
Yeah, she is the boss. Come on. You admitted it finally, huh?
She always has been. It is what it is.
Hello.
Hey, I've got you on speaker here. Do you know what are the current amounts for Medicaid? Do you know what they are?
For burial, it's 3056.
3056. Are you sure it's not 3057? 30, somebody said they thought it's
I was off
$3057.
$2. It's 356.
Okay, she's swearing it's 3056. All right. Well,
Okay.
you were closer than I was. You were much closer
Yeah.
than I was. All right, so 3056. How much
And
can the
the,
family contribute?
I think it's 750 maybe.
No, it's more than that. It used to be 1570.
Switched to
Are you sure about that? Do you know how much it is for a newborn?
newborn. That's 1750, I think.
Okay, it's 1750 for a newborn. Any idea for what it is up to 2 years of age? Like a stillborn is one thing. A
Yeah.
newborn or like a 1-year-old is different.
I think they just categorize it in that. It's like if you're 2 or older, you're an adult.
Okay, well, 0 to 2 is one amount. I know that there's a different amount for 0 to 2 years old, a stillborn, and then over 2 years old. You know, let me look. I'll look it up. I'll hop in the code. I'll find it there. I thought you might know it off the top of your head, but that's all right.
I don't deal a lot with infants, so I don't know those
All right,
numbers.
that's fair enough. That's fair enough. All right, let me see if I can find it elsewhere. Thank you.
You're
All
welcome.
right, I'll talk to you in a bit, hon.
All right, bye.
Yeah. All right, so she was not 100% sure. I thought she might know. Let's take a
I
look
think for
on.
adults, for like 2 years and older, it's 3056 and cemetery is 714 and the family contribution is 1570, right? We deal with that all the time, so that I am sure. But for
Okay.
1 week to 2 years, I don't know if the table I have is updated or not. It says that it's from 2022, so I don't know if they
Okay.
have changed it after that or no.
What does it say as far as 0 to like a newborn up to 2 years?
It's yeah, it says 1 week to 2 years. The funeral is 2494 and cemetery or crematory is 583 and
Okay.
supplementation, which is like family's contribution, it is 1178.
Okay.
And somebody wrote something 1 week to 2 years is 1684. I don't know. See, it means that the table I have probably is not updated. So I don't know where to
Okay.
find the most current one, because
Okay.
definitely I
So
hear that they ask these questions.
all right, somebody just put it in here. 1 week to 2 years old, the state provides up to 1,684 for funeral services and 393 for cemetery cremation costs. Family and friends can supplement up to 1,176, making maximum allowed cost 3,253. So that's that one. I don't know what it is for a newborn, or I'm sorry, for a stillborn, excuse me, because it is different when somebody's born. You know, obviously that's obviously where things change, and it's different to over 2 years old. So, well, here's what I'd say to do. You can find that online. Um,
Yeah,
Okay.
where did
that is
Fatima
in the
get that
regs.
info?
What's that?
Where did Fatima get that info that she's putting in the chat?
Fatima, where did you get that info?
Oh, a friend of mine sent me this chart like a couple of months ago. I don't know. I'm
Oh,
Oh,
like
okay, good.
studying
I
it
thought
now,
maybe
but
she
I don't
chat
know.
GPT'd it. I don't know.
You could chat GPT
No, I know, but I
sometimes.
think there's such a risk
It
of it
has
being
wrong
inaccurate.
answers most of the time,
Yeah, a
so
No,
lot
I
of
that's what
don't
I'm saying.
trust
times.
it.
It's usually
Yeah.
wrong.
And the problem is it's so confident in itself, you'll think it's right.
Yeah.
So,
Cocky, right?
yeah, stillborn is 6 days old. The state provides up to 1,123 for funeral. And 262 for the cemetery cremation cost. Family and friends can supplement up to 785, making the total 2170. So thank you. It just says Zoom user, so I'm not sure who put that in, but thank you. I appreciate that.
Sorry, I'm just jumping in. I'm on the I'm going to double check. I'm on the New Jersey Funeral Directors Association website, and there's a chart
Oh
for
yeah.
public assistance funerals for stillborn to 6 days. They have the 1933
Mm-hmm.
cemetery crematory 452. Um, Supplementation by the family allowed is 785 for a total of 3170, and they have it broken down for 1 to 2 years and 2 years and older on the website.
Okay, all
Put
right. So
that link in the
it must be
chat.
correct then, right, Professor Daly, if it's on the
Yeah.
website?
Yeah, I
Okay.
would assume I would definitely take anything off the association's website as gospel because they're pretty darn thorough. I would trust them over the state board any day. And
Can
again,
you
like
confirm what is it for 1 week to 2 years old? Is it 2494 for the funeral and crematory cemetery is 583 and family's contribution is 1178 for 1 week to 2 years?
That's what it says for 1 to 2 years on this chart.
Oh, okay.
Mary, can you put
Perfect.
the
I
link in the chat for that chart?
I'm looking at it on my phone, but I can probably do it. Sure.
Oh, okay.
I'll tell you what,
I thought you were on your laptop or something.
No,
while
I
you
can do
folks are
it.
looking at that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and find that FTC book real quick. Uh, Actually, you know what? Let me do. I'll come. You know what? Let's do this because I still have a couple slides I want to get through. Let's get through these slides and then we'll circle back to that. Like I said, not to leave you with a non-answer there, but I intentionally leave certain things blank so that I don't just rattle them off to sort of say, hey, you know, look these things up. So an emergency burial permit, this is an antiquated notion. It's something you should still know about. Okay, this goes back to the day and age of, let's say it was a long holiday weekend and you had somebody that needed to be buried very quickly. You could get an emergency burial permit. And what you would do is you would get to, thank you, Mary, for putting that in there. So there's a link right in there with right, taking it right to those lists.
Thank you,
Um,
Mary.
yes, thank you, Mary. It used to be, sorry, go ahead.
No, I just said you're welcome.
Ah, awesome. Well, thank you. So it used to be you would have to get a judge involved because there's always a judge available, right? So you would have to go and get a judge to give you an emergency burial permit. EDRS has rendered this completely meaningless. You really don't need an emergency burial permit because so long as the doctor has signed the death certificate, like get certified it, you're good to go. But again, in theory, there could possibly be a scenario where that might happen. And if you ever needed an emergency burial permit, that's what you would do. You would go for a judge or a justice of the peace, and they would issue you an emergency burial permit. If there is no person in charge of the cemetery, the funeral home is then in charge of filing that burial permit with the applicable town. Now, the reason I mention this is not so much about the cemetery. There's a really odd regulation, and what it says is this. This is a scenario I can almost guarantee you're never going to see. If you have somebody that dies outside of the state of New Jersey, they die in Pennsylvania, New York, Delaware, Florida, Wisconsin, wherever, right? And they are a veteran, and you are burying them in a cemetery where nobody is in charge, like one of these little town cemeteries. There was one when I lived in Riverside. There was this little cemetery in the middle of town. There probably hadn't been a burial there since probably 1962, you know, but it was still there. If you could still bury there if there was space, you know, you just have to call a grave digger. Now, anyway, if you buried somebody there who was a veteran who died outside of the state, it then falls to the funeral director to notify Veteran Affairs at a county level that a veteran is buried there. So the idea is at a county level, the VA wants to know where veterans are buried so that they can acknowledge them, you know, Memorial Day, go around, put flags on their graves, things like that. But they need to know where they are. Now, if you're burying in a cemetery where somebody's in charge, they'll notify them. If you're filing a death certificate in the state of New Jersey, they'll get notified via that. It asks the veteran status. If somebody dies outside of the state, there's no death certificate being filed in the state, so there's no way that they would know. There's nobody in charge of the cemetery, so it then falls to the funeral director to notify the county VA that a veteran has been buried there. Again, something you will never see in practice, but that possibility exists for them to ask questions about that.
Professor
Uh,
Daly, is there such question or such thing that you have to notify them like before the 10th of every month or something like that?
Well, as far as your internship, yes, and that's by the 15th. But I can't think of anything else that falls on a date like that.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the only thing I can think of. Is your internship paperwork has to be in on the 15th, but like for every month. But I can't think of anything else. Nothing else is jumping out at me. I can't say authoritatively 100%, but nothing is jumping
Okay.
out to me.
Hmm.
Now, communicable lists, communicable disease. I have a list, a couple slides down. If you have somebody that dies of like plague, you're supposed to notify the Department of Health within 12 hours. Now, I've had students have told me they've had bodies. Like I had a student that had they told me they had a body with I think yellow fever, which is on that list. I was like, "Did you notify someone?" They're like, "No, we just had them cremated." I was like, "No, I don't even know exactly if you notified somebody at the Department of Health what they'd even do with that information." But according to the letter of the law, if somebody dies with these diseases, and I'll give you the list. It's like plague, yellow fever, maybe malaria. No, it's not malaria, but I'll show you the list here in a second. You're supposed to notify the Department of Health. And reporting veterans death already covered that one.
Wait, I have a
EDR,
quick question.
sorry, go ahead.
When we're doing, so what do you exactly do you mean by no one in charge of like a cemetery? That's a bit
So
confusing.
sometimes there's just like a little cemetery where there's
Oh, it's
nobody.
like a okay, I get it. It's like it's like micro. I've seen them before. There's like five or
Yeah.
six headstones. That's it.
Yeah, it's like there's headstones from like the 1800s there. Nobody's
Yeah,
buried there in generations, but
yeah.
it's still a cemetery, you know?
Okay.
So how do you acquire a plot and all if there's no person there to arrange it with?
My guess would be somebody would already have that plot. They would have already bought
Oh,
that
okay.
plot from years
Mhm.
back, you know. So they come in, they've got a deed, you know, they're like, oh, well, grandpa was buried there. I don't know. Grandpa died young and grandma lived to be 110 years old, that type of a situation, you know.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be my guess, you know.
Hmm.
Now, burial at sea, you need to know the requirements on that as far as the what is it, 20 holes that have to be drilled into the casket. That's what, eight on top, eight on the bottom, and you know, four on the sides. You need the straps. Was it one, two, what, four, five,
Six
six? You
guys.
have to have six
Hmm.
straps. Yeah, like two at the head end, two at the foot end, one going around the top, one going around the side. You have to have ballast on there. It has to be at least 300 pounds in total, I think is the number. But again, verify all of this, trust but verify, right? And again, if you went to a different school, all of this stuff should be in. There's a book that is I thought I had a copy of it over there. It's a book that lists all of the different types of services. Like here's what you would do on a Catholic service, here's what you would do on a Protestant service, here's what you would do on a Buddhist service. If you're a Mercer student, if you look in the supplement, it's right in there, the burial at sea information. And anybody that if you went to a different school, I don't care if you have a hard time finding this information, I'll give you my email at the end. Feel free to reach out to me. Hey, we don't care if you went to a different school. We just want to see everybody get licensed. We don't play favorites, man. We're all in this thing together, you know. So if you have questions, always reach out to us, you know. Um, signatures on the death certificate, obviously 3 or 4 signatures based on if the funeral director will always be on there, the registrar will always be on there. The pronouncer and the certifier can be the same person, right? The person who pronounces the death and certifies it, let's say the doctor's there, they call the time of death. The time of death is 3:15 p.m. and they died of whatever, whatever, right? And I'm trying to think of a name. I'm not bad at ad lib. Anyway, so but that would be them doing both the pronouncing and certifying. So it'd just be 3 signatures. Sometimes there's 4 signatures in that the funeral director, the registrar of vital statistics, the pronouncer, right? There's somebody pronounces, let's say a nurse pronounces, okay, the time of death is 3:15. Then the next day you get the doctor to sign off. They give you they certify it with the cause of death. With a disinterment permit, that requires 7 signatures. Now, I doubt you're going to see a question asking you what 7 signatures are on there. It's the funeral director, the lot owner, the person requesting the disinterment be done, the next of kin, who I might have already said, but I'm not sure. The cemetery official at where you're doing the disinterment, the registrar where you're doing the disinterment, and the cemetery official at where you are taking the decedent, I think is the 7. I doubt you're going to see a question on that one, but you never know. FTC disclosure disclaimer. That's really the idea. Do you need to have somebody sign off on the fact that they received a general price list? No, it's a good idea. It's a very good CYA, cover your rear, but to have them sign off saying they received a general price list, a casket price list, outer burial container price list, but there's no requirement there. Now, as far as the FTC disclosures, there are 6 of them on the general price list. And here again, that's all in that FTC book. And I'm going to try and find it here in a second. I'm going to try and put a link up to it. It might take me a second here at the end. All of that's listed in there. And there's 3 disclosures on the statement of funeral goods and services. One that is not applicable in New Jersey. The 3 disclosures, I'm going off the top of my head here. The embalming disclosure, that embalming is not required by law, but may be required in certain cases if you want an open casket, blah, 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 blah. The second is you'll only be charged for those items that you select. If we do have to charge you for something that's required by law or by the cemetery, we'll explain, meaning that if let's say the cemetery requires a vault, okay, we'll explain that in writing. Now, the third disclosure, which you'll see on the national, you could see on the national, but you most likely will not see on the state test, is regarding cash advance items. And some states allow you to mark up cash advance items. If so, you have to disclose that to families. New Jersey does not allow you to mark up cash advance items, so we don't have that disclosure on our statement of funeral goods and services. But like I said, all that's in that FTC book. All right, Uniform Anatomical Gift Act. That changes the way that people give bodies to somebody. If a body goes to a medical school, like at Mercer, we have a donor program. When bodies come to us, the families bequeath the bodies to us. It's much different than giving a body over to a funeral home where the family still retains constructive custody of that individual. They do not retain constructive custody of an individual when they donate somebody to a medical institution. The idea being, let's say you're doing a process, like we've got this weird table that we rarely use up in the classroom at Mercer, but it's got like 6 or 7 bodies in it, the digital reconstructions of them. It takes months and months and months for them to do it because they'll shave a body apart and each little millimeter they'll make a digital image of. It takes months and they'll cut through the body. They can't be halfway through a body and have a family call them up and go, "We changed our mind. We're going to have a viewing on Friday night." No, you can't do that. If a family gave a body to us at Mercer and they called us the next day and said, "We've changed our mind," we could tell them to go pound sand. We wouldn't, but by law we could. Now, the Uniform Anatomical Gift Act also allows anybody 18 years or older to donate their remains if they choose to. As an adult, you're allowed to do that. You can say, "Yes, I want to donate my organs. I want to donate my body," whatever you want to do. Victims of violent crime compensation. I don't think you're going to need to know numbers on this, just that it exists. If somebody does have if somebody has been a victim of violent crime, there is money that they can get towards their services. I want to say it's around $7,500. It's a fair amount of money. Not that anybody wants to be the victim of violent crime or have that happen to a family member, but it is nice to mention to a family, like, "Look, we can get you substantial funding towards this." Now, medical waste. Remember, regulated medical waste. Anything that is, there's either medical equipment, meaning you pull a trach out of somebody's mouth or out of their throat, that's medical waste. Anything that's soaked or caked through with blood, that's regulated medical waste. Now, with regulated medical waste, remember there is a cradle to grave responsibility with that. So even if you do everything right and you box up everything and you're doing everything right, and the company that you hire picked up the medical waste, and the driver decides to stop and have a 3 martini lunch, and he gets liquored up and crashes, and now you've got your medical waste all over a nursery school playground, right? Not a good look. You're still responsible for that medical waste because there's a cradle to grave responsibility on that, which is bonkers, but that's the way the law is written. Now, wills terminology, again, you just need the basics on that. Executor, executrix, administrator, administratrix, all that jazz. I don't think they get really too involved with will stuff. The basics, I've been told. It has been a spell since I've taken this test, but that's what I've been told. State Board of Mortuary Science, how many members? Who appoints them? How long is their term? Members of the public, right? How many members of the public are there? I just added this slide today, and I did that, and again, intentionally left it blank without the answers for me to see so that you can look them up. Again, I've had students tell me that they've seen questions about, in fact, I remember seeing questions about this when I took it, and that was 25 years ago, 24 years ago, whatever it was. It was a spell, it was 24 years. So anyway, yeah, but I think that's the last. Oh, no, that's not the last slide. Prohibited embalming compounds. We are not allowed to use arsenic, zinc, arsenic, lead, mercury, zinc, silver, antimony, chloral, any poisonous alkaloid. And then the statute actually makes it longer, and they say you can't include copper or cyanogen in embalming compounds. Why? I don't know. We don't make embalming fluid. I mean, I don't know, whipping up a batch of that stuff in the sink before I'm embalming somebody. I don't know why this is required for us to know, but it is what it is. And the diseases, the communicable diseases that you have to notify the Department of Health: smallpox, cholera, yellow fever, typhus fever, plague. Again, you don't see a lot of these, which is a good thing. But if you do, you're supposed to notify the Department of Health. Again, if you notify the Department of Health, I don't even know if they would know what to do. But that's what by the letter of the law, it's what you're supposed to do. And that's the end.
I have one more quick question.
Go right ahead.
Miscellaneous category. You said something about receiving vaults. What is that again? I don't know if I missed it. I was spacing out. Like what?
Oh, receiving vaults. Okay, receiving vaults. Now, receiving vaults are something you will never see in practice. When I first started teaching, I remember reading about them, and I reached out to Mr. Smith, who ran the program for many, many years, and he now runs the ABFSC. But I was like, Mr. Smith, I was like, what is this receiving vault thing? I was like, have you ever seen one? He was like, yeah, I saw one like right after I was licensed. He saw one, he said, like 1971 or something. They're not common. Receiving vaults they're more common in like northern states, like in Maine and Vermont, things like that. If you're in an area that they cannot bury over the winter months where the ground gets too hard, it's not uncommon for them to have receiving vaults, meaning at a cemetery, you'd go there, you'd have your service, the cemetery would take the casket, they would put it into a receiving vault, wait for the ground to thaw, they would then dig the hole and bury the person when they could. A receiving vault in New Jersey, if you put an unembalmed body into it, it can only be there for 48 hours unless it is designed. It's either one of two things. It's either 5 feet or deeper underground, or number two, if it is made and constructed in a manner that prevents the escape of noxious fumes and odors, right? And again, something you will never see in practice. I had to call up an old funeral director, and even he was like, maybe I saw one in the 70s, so it's something you won't see a lot of.
Wait,
There's an active receiving vault in Long Valley Branch. No kidding. No kidding. I'm sorry, go ahead.
You said unembalmed body for 48 hours, and what are the other choices?
Okay, unless it is either 5 feet or deeper underground, and double check this because it's been a while since I've looked at this regulation, or it is designed to prevent the escape of noxious fumes and odors, meaning you can't, odors and smells can't come out of it. So if it
case?
essentially, but we're talking about a room that you're putting a casket in,
So
it,
you meant like the actual casket itself has to be made to prevent like noxious fumes or odors.
No, I'm talking, and it's a weird terminology. The terminology is receiving vault. So you think of a vault, but it's not. It's really like a room
A
that you would
room.
put a
Oh,
casket into and wait out the winter months,
okay.
which is like I said, odd, but you know, it is what it is. So give me 1 second here just to find the because I know that I have. All right, hold on, give me 1 second. Let me stop sharing there. Okay, well, that's all right. Let me just, all right, here we go. All right. That's not it. Let me see. All right. See, I know that I have this saved on a Google Drive, but I just can't remember which Google Drive it's saved under. All right, let me sign out because I know it's not under my personal. That could be it. All right. All right, give me a second. Let me, you know what? I'm just gonna find the thing on my computer. I'm gonna upload it and all right. I'm just gonna make a new link for it because I'll be forever looking for this thing. FTC, where are you? FTC funeral questions. Where are you? FTC book, FTC stuff. Should be in package one. No, no. Um, no. All right, hmm, let's see, where are you? That's a door to door. So I'm complying with the funeral rule. There it is. All right. Let me save this. I know where it is. And then desktop 295. All right. Save there. Okay. Now I can hop into my thingamabobber. Let me upload this. File upload. All right. Desktop 5. FTC complying with the funeral rule. There we go. All right. So that's uploading. All right, I'm gonna refresh this so I can get to it. And now I gotta just change the little share.
Professor Taylor, you will upload the recording on Mercer channel, right? Mercer YouTube channel?
Yeah, I will. Um, I just need to figure out how to make this shareable. Give me 1 second here. Organized, no, file information, detail, security limitations. There we go. No, that didn't do it. I just did this earlier. Share, so I can wait. I can copy the link. Just found this earlier. Show file location details, security limitations. Wait. Share. No. Why is this thing? I just have to figure out how to make this viewable. Because it's right now it's just telling me like all right, manage version. No, that won't do it. I thought security things would do that. Security, there are, wait, no limitations applied. Okay. Oh, manage access, duh. Anyone with the link? Yes. Anyone with the link. All right, so let me get the link. Share, copy link. All right. All right, so here we go. Wait, and then I just closed the chat. There you go. So that's the FTC funeral rule book. That was made by the FTC and it is made for funeral directors. So that explains everything and anything you can come across as far as the funeral rule is concerned. I would look that over and I would look at the disclaimers. There's 6 in the general price list. There's 3 on the statement of funeral goods and services. And then the basics. I mean, obviously, if somebody asks for a GPL, you have to give it to them, jazz like that. Even if it's your competitor, you have to give them a copy of it. But that explains pretty much everything that you come across at the FTC. So,
Professor Daly, for New Jersey, you have to retain GPL, CPL, and OBCPL for 3 years, right?
that's
All 3
correct.
of them for 3
That's
years.
correct.
Okay.
Yeah, for 3 years. And when you're taking the national, remember the federal government only
1.
requires you to keep it for 1 year. New
Yeah.
Jersey requires you to keep it for 3. That's a good
Mm.
point. I should add that to the slides. Next time I write these slides, I'm going to call you up, Fatima. I'll have you write them. Good, good. I think we're in good shape. Does anybody have any questions or anything? I know I just threw a lot at you there.
You're going to give us your email in case we have questions?
Yes, you're right. I am sorry about that. mccc.edu. There you go. It's just dailym at mccc. Remember, there's 3 C's on that. I actually got an email from somebody at another school. It was dailym at mcc.edu. He's like, I keep getting your emails. So remember, there's 3 C's in that. So yeah, if you have questions, reach out, let me know, and let me know how you did. I mean, again, I don't want to know questions. I'm not trying to farm for questions or anything like that. But let me know how you felt. If you felt good about it, if you didn't, and I wish you all the best. Again, I don't care where you went to school. If you have questions while you're prepping for this thing, feel free to reach out to me. I'm more than happy to help wherever I can. So.
Thank you so much for everything tonight.
Hey, you got it. You're more than welcome. More than happy to. So, if there's no other questions, I'm going to call it a day because I didn't plan on going this late. I'm not complaining. I certainly enjoy the interaction, but I didn't think we've gone this late, so I'm going to wrap things up unless anybody has any questions. Going once, going twice. You're very welcome. All right.
Thank you.
Hey, you're
Thank
welcome.
you.
Take care and like I said, all the best on it. Knock this thing out of the park. I don't want to see anybody have to take this thing more than once, man. Knock it out and be done with it. Take care, everyone. Have a good night. And if you want to watch this back, like I said, I'm gonna let it download. I'll add it to our YouTube page, which is MCCC Funeral Program, I think it is. And if you put MCC Funeral Program into YouTube, you'll find us. And I think the only things that are really public on there are most of these reviews. But I'll put that up there, and in the links, I'll have the slides, and I'll also put that FTC booklet in there as well in the description for it. So if you need it, you can download it from there as well.
Thank you.
Hey,
Thank you.
you're very welcome. Take care, all.
Yeah. Bye.
Good night.